Good afternoon, Chair Smith. I can confirm we are live to YouTube now. I'll pass the meeting over to you.
Thank you, sir. So welcome everybody and Happy New Year. We're back virtually. We thought we'd be here again. But today's January 17th for our Halifax Board of Police Commissioners. I'll call the meeting to order. And always we'll give our land acknowledgement that we are on Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are all treaty people. Before we get to our election of chair and vice chair, just we do have regrets from Commissioner Thomas, who's not able to be here today, and Commissioner Critchley, who is not able to be here today, who would definitely, if he could, would be here with bells on. He's not feeling well at the moment, and we're wishing him the best. He had a spell of food poisoning and at the Dartmouth General, so wishing him the best and fast recovery. He may pop in if possible, but I've told him that he doesn't need to be here. Recover is most important. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Ian, who's going to do our vice chair and election of chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a process that we do need to do once a year, so we will try to go quickly and we'll have a chair set in place for this next calendar year. So we do require nominations for chair for the Board of Police Commissioners. So I will begin by asking if there is any nominations for chair of the Board of Police Commissioners.
I nominate Lindell Smith for chair.
Second.
I have a mover and a seconder for Lindell Smith as chair of the Board of Police Commissioners. Is there any other nominees for chair of the Board of Police Commissioners? And a third time, is there any other nominees for chair of the Board of Police Commissioners? Hearing no other nominees, I will have heard Lindell Smith as chair of the Board of Police Commissioners, moved by Carol McDougall, seconded by Lisa Blackburn. Hearing no other nominees, Chair Smith, I will pass the meeting over to you.
Appreciate it, and thanks, commissioners. I can't believe it's been a year already. Wow, how time flies when you're having fun. So appreciate that. So we'll do the election of vice chair. So nomination for vice chair.
Mr. Chair, sir. Yes, thank you. I would like to nominate Carol McDougall as Vice Chair of the Board of Police Commissioners.
Thank
yes,
you.
sir. Seconded by me.
Thank you. Seconded by Commissioner Kandudu. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Seeing none, Commissioner McDougall, you are Vice Chair. Thank you. All right, well, appreciate that, everybody. We got our chair and vice chair. So moving on to our next item, committee announcements. And Commissioner McDougall, you did ask if you could speak first.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for your support. I'm really looking forward to this year, and I think there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm happy to stay in this role as vice chair for this time. I wanted to start off with recognition of Alexa McDonough and the loss of this truly inspiring leader in our community, in our province, and in our country. And I don't think it's too much to say that she would be respected around the world. This morning in All Nova Scotia, there was a tribute to her written by a journalist and quoting Megan Leslie, who replaced Alexa as a member of Parliament. And Megan said she isn't just a role model, she was affecting change, noting that McDonough made strides in queer issues, matters involving people of Africville, and in opposition to Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. She would amplify the voices of others. She would create space for leaders from those communities to lead. And if you look up any definition of leadership, that's true leadership. I also noticed that in her obituary, which was posted on the weekend, there's a quote, she was beloved, respected, and a significant player in Canadian life. And I would say she was also a significant contributor to Canadian life. But I want to just close by saying she was also a mom to 2 amazing sons, a grandmother to 7, and a friend and inspiration for so many friends, both here in our community and across the country. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize Alexa McDonough for the accomplishment and outstanding inspiration she's been for many of us, particularly women who have stood up and tried to make a difference in other people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that acknowledgement for sure. Any other members with announcements? Okay, seeing none, thank you again, Commissioner McDougall. So approval of our minutes, December 13th, 2021. Mover and seconder, please. Moved by Commissioner McDougall, seconded by Commissioner Blackburn. Any comments on the minutes before we call for the question? Nope, seeing no questions on that. All those in favor of approval of the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right, we have minutes. So approval of order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Do we have anything, clerk?
There are no additions or deletions from the municipal clerk's office for the meeting today.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask that
Okay.
we.
Mr. Chair, just before we get going, I'm having some technical problems. I'm still finding that I cannot access an agenda. Perhaps if Ian could put it in the chat or send me a text, that might be helpful. I'm just having trouble with pulling files. Luckily, I printed off some big reports that we have to deal with, but I'm just limited, so I appreciate it. Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. And Ian put it in the chat. I'll give you a second to make sure it works for you.
Yeah, do you have one perhaps that I could print off? I mean, I can print this one off, but it would print off a whole lot of extras. That way, at least I've got something that will not disappear on me if I have to switch to my phone or something. I'm just thinking ahead to if I continue to have problems, I want to have some opportunity to have pieces. So I can, okay, I'll just print it off there then. Thank you.
Okay. Yep, just feel free to, if you need something else, just interrupt. All right, so
Sorry about that. Just one second.
Yeah. Thanks. So I'm going to ask that we move request for consideration from Commissioner Critchley's motion up ahead of the December 13th, 2021 motion or the budget, because depending on what the commissioner decides on this motion could determine how we move forward with the budget presentation. So
Great.
if commissioners are fine with us moving that ahead of that, and I think that was the only other. Yes, that was the only other one. Okay, so if you don't mind, I ask that we move that ahead of the proposed operating budget discussion.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Do we need we don't need a seconder for that change. We just got to approve.
So noting that the request has been made to move item 7.1 up to be the next item of business, the first item of business we deal with after call for declarations of conflict of interest. We will need a mover and a seconder to approve the order of business as amended to make that change formally, but we do not need an additional one right now.
Okay, great.
I'll move that we amend the order of business, or that we approve the order of business as amended.
All right, moved by Commissioner Blackburn, seconded by Commissioner McDougall. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. All right, we have an agenda. Moving to business arising out of the minutes. We have none, I believe so. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Are there any
Carol,
conflict?
I think Carol was waiting for
Oh,
your
sorry.
item.
I don't know that it's exactly business arising, but I did notice that we approved the first 3 dates of the meetings going forward for 2022. And then there would be a staff memorandum. I'm just wondering if there's a timing, anything attached to when we can receive that report from staff related to timing and financial implications of changing the schedule. Is there a time?
Chair Smith, can I respond to that question?
Yes.
The intention is to bring a report back to the Board of Police Commissioners in February with that information, with the hope and intention of also bringing a supplemental report to set up the meetings for the rest of the year, obviously dependent on the Board of Police schedule and what they direct from that report coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's actually a good point to bring up. Moving to our calls for declarations of conflict of interest. Any of conflicts to recognize? All right, seeing none. So we, as mentioned, we changed our agenda to deal with the motion from Commissioner Critchley, which I'm going to just bring up in a second. Oh, which I seem to have closed. So bear with me as I open it. Well, I don't know where it would Ian, do you mind throwing it in the chat just in case I can't find it? Okay, I found it. I got lost in the shuffle here. So the motion for Commissioner Critchley on his behalf reads that the Board of Police Commissioners hold a special online meeting to give members of the general public an opportunity to provide input and feedback regarding the proposed HRP budget for fiscal 22-23.
I'll second that, Lisa.
Thank you, Commissioner Blackburn. And thank you, Andrea, for throwing in the chat. So Commissioner Critchley, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, not able to be here today because he's feeling unwell and dealing with some food poisoning, but we had a discussion around this motion and the intent. And he laid out pretty clearly on the motion paper. For those who might be following along online, you can find it on the agenda, his reasoning for doing that, and really related to two factors. One is our duties as a board, where we are, part of our duties is to deliver oversight with community values in mind. But also, as we move forward, governance is very, very important to Harry, and he's made that very clear in previous meetings. And one of the things I think is important for us to do when we're thinking about governance is how we approach budgets. And actually, this is something that a few years ago I talked about with many different folks in HRM related to how do we have the same process within our commission that we have for council budget, where members of the public are able to present to council during budget discussions before the meeting starts on items related to the budget, which in the usual fashion you can't present to council, but during budget discussions you can. And I think that's important because one of the biggest pieces of how we collect our money and pay for services is property taxes, which is from residents. So it's important that we hear from them when it comes to budget. So I support what we're looking to do, what Harry's looking to do in having the public come and speak to the commission related to the budget. And the hope for the future, long term, is that we create a process similar to what council has for budget, where members of the public can come and speak to the commission while we're having budget deliberations on future budgets. So that's something that I know the clerk's office is going to take back and see how we fit that in with our meetings. But with that, I'll try to answer any questions that might come through this, and we'll start the discussion. Commissioner Blackburn, you're first.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. No, this is more a procedural question than anything else, and so this is probably going to be for Ian. You know, how fast can we stand up this meeting? Is this something that we can do between now and the scheduled February meeting? And by doing this, does this put the chief behind the 8 ball and running the risk of not meeting his timelines to present to regional council?
I can start off as a response to this question through you, Chair, to the commissioner. I also want to acknowledge that I do believe we have other staff who may be able to speak to some of the budget timing and budget process timing, so I'll defer to any of them if there's anything that needs to come up. The intention would be to schedule this meeting as quickly as possible, sometime within the next 2 weeks, ideally, based on schedules, of course, to be able to allow for that and to be able to allow for proper timing and scheduling so we can notify and make sure that the public are aware as well. I won't speak to any of the timing on the budget pieces. I will defer that to other colleagues.
All right. Before you go, with this special online meeting, this would follow the same process that we would follow for any other public participation meeting, 5-minute limits, that type of thing?
Chair Smith, through you to the commissioner, yes, that would be the intention.
Okay.
We do have a process in place that is used through our budget committee of the whole process that I believe would be appropriately applied to this, and it would make sense.
Perfect. So the rules are already in place. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And before I go to Commissioner Kent, just wondering if anyone, either the chief or anyone from the staff side, could talk on timelines on if 2 weeks from now would affect the overall budget. I see Chief, I see you on the screen.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and through you to the Commission. The date that I have for reporting to Council is February 24th, with a backup day of February 25th.
Sorry, I was muted. So if you get to us before that date, you're fine. If we make a decision before that date on your budget, then you're okay to present to council.
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in favor of this course of action. I like it. I think it's a good change and it's the way forward. I have a couple of questions in relation to the activities of today and the potential for impact on Chief Cancella's budget as well. I would encourage us, should we go forward with this, to try to get this kind of meeting in sooner than later, so we then can get back to the table to make a decision. Should we make any, not necessarily, I don't know, any changes to what we see as, or not approve any portion of the motion that's before us and has anything related to the budget. We want Chief Kinsella to have the opportunity to make any adjustments that he would have to make in relation to presenting to council. The piece on today's, what does that do for today's motion? Does it affect anything in relation to that? Thank you.
So I'll jump in. Thank you, Commissioner Kent. So it really depends on how the commission wants to deal with it. So my thought, and Jerry, I'll get you next. Jerry Blackwood has his hand up. Would be that because the motion does say that we would hold a special meeting related to this year's budget, my suggestion would be we would defer the budget presentation that we have scheduled today until that special meeting, and hopefully sooner than later, as Commissioner Kent mentioned, rather than getting a presentation today and then getting another presentation. So if the commission wants to do it different, then more than willing, because we still have to make a decision on deferring that presentation. So there's still another step we have to take. If this gets approved, we still have to make the decision to defer the budget presentation. So really, my thoughts would be that we would if this was approved, we then would defer the presentation that we have coming up to the special meeting. But again, that's really up to the commission if that's how they want to move forward. Does that help, Commissioner Kent?
Yeah, I'd like to. I may have a comment. Well, no, I'll make the comment now. I'm kind of depending, I guess, on how long we think the presentation on from L. Jones will take. But we have staff here. They're ready to present. It's not unusual for sometimes we'd have a presentation and then defer the decision. I'm open to that as well. But I'm anxious to hear as well from Jerry Blackwood.
Jerry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I think Jerry Blackwood, CFO, just to Commissioner Kent's points, the chief mentioned his budget presentation to council is February 24th, but we just want to be mindful that the deadline for him to submit his budget business plan for review of finance and CAO, we want to build in a little bit of lead time there for him to do that. So I think it's usually about 2 weeks before the presentation that it starts going through the general review process. So my recommendation would be, if you're having this public consultation piece within the next 2 weeks, would fit into that timeline. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. Any other members with comments? Okay, see some hands. I'll go to you first, Chief, and then go to Commissioner McDougall.
Thanks, Chair, and through you. I just wanted to reiterate, and Jerry covered it off there. There will be some lead time required. If I've got to be to them on the 10th, I will need some direction from the board, particularly as it relates to major changes to the budget in advance of that, so I can do any rework with the team here on whatever the board is looking for. So I think we just got to be mindful of that. Jerry covered it off. I just wanted to reiterate. Thank you.
Chief. Commissioner McDougall.
I just wanted to mention that any public meeting or announcement of it really needed to be broadcast widely, and as early as possible, so that people could participate. I noticed there were a few people who they don't understand the process of making a presentation or being able to contribute. And so anything we can do to make that clearer, more transparent for the public would be great.
Good points. And what we can do is depend if this gets approved, which I think it possibly could. From what I've heard today, we could probably, whoever is interested, work with the clerk's office to see how we could get the word out. And I'm sure that the more the word gets out, the better. So I agree with that. Marty?
Yeah, I just want to add, it's a question really for the clerk, does the budget go out with the notice of the public meeting? So, I mean, if you want to have meaningful contribution by the public, they should have at least a few days to perhaps have a look at the presentation in advance. And that way, I think that would make more sense. But
So through Chair Smith, the intention of this meeting, from my understanding and from listening to the conversation, will be to allow for some sort of a public participation and conversation on the budget. As we do this and as things are decided by the Board of Police Commissioners, we will work through and make sure that we have the agenda posted and a public registration process that we do not typically have for these meetings applied to ensure that that can be done.
Yes, my question was, does the actual presentation go out in advance? To Carol's point, I think that where Carol was concerned that people meaningfully contribute to the process, I'm wondering if the presentation goes out in advance.
So through the chair, as we put out agendas for meetings, we put out the entirety of the agenda. So if there is a presentation, that can be included as part of the agenda package as well.
And just to add to that too, like the current motion that's on the floor that was deferred from last meeting, we would, if we were deferred today, be the same presentation that folks have on today's agenda. So unless I don't think anything will change from now until if we schedule a public meeting, but it is there available for the public now. Folks wanted some extra lead time. Sorry, I'm just reading in the chat. Okay. Commissioner Kent.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going through Councillor Critchley's motion and his notes. And in particular, he also has asked that it be conducted outside of regular business hours in late afternoon or evening. And I know what his intention is there, because there are folks that have a difficult time to, you know, arrange their schedules to be able to meet with us. So I think we're going to need to have a conversation around that. What I've often suggested in cases like this is that we look at late afternoons, which allows for folks, if they have a workday schedule, perhaps they can leave a little earlier, and then it'll transfer into part of the evening potentially. That gives our staff as well some sort of a flexibility as well, as opposed to taking the whole evening, but I'm certainly open to consideration. The other piece that he wrote on was having written submissions. So I'm assuming that we would certainly receive those, as we always do, but oral presentations up to a maximum of 10 minutes. I don't think that's typically what we do from a council model. And so I think that's worth having some discussion on as well. You know, this one has the potential to have a lot of engagement. I hope that it does. And 10 minutes would really, I think, impact the volume of people that we could get to be able to have that opportunity. 5 minutes has been the standard in council, in committee meetings, throughout the municipality. And I'm going to recommend that we stick with that. If we find that that has not been helpful and it needs to be adjusted, you know, this is a beginning of something new, and I'm open to that. But I'm going to suggest that we leave it for 5 minutes, and hoping with hopes that more people will be able to share their comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to follow up on that, with that not being with the 10 minutes not being in the motion itself, my recommendation would be that we would stick with, as you mentioned, the 5 minutes that we have for presentations. And if we need to review that, we'll definitely review that, and when the time comes. But for this meeting, if approved, I would support us continuing with our current model, which is 5 minutes per presentation.
So Marty, do we need to amend that, a friendly amendment to that motion at all, to make sort of in keeping with the model of presentations that we currently have? Do we need to have that in there?
It's not in the, his motion doesn't, his motion itself doesn't mention changing the time. So in his I guess body, it mentions that, but in the motion itself, it doesn't have a time. So the way I read it is we would stick to our current public feedback process that we have. But Marty, yeah, if you have anything, let me know.
No, I think you're right. The default position is it's 5 minutes, right? And unless the motion puts something different, it's the 5 minutes would apply.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner McDougall.
Sorry, unmuting is a challenge today for some reason. So I just wanted to mention that our own process has been 10 minutes or 5 minutes. So without being unnecessarily bureaucratic, that's kind of what we've done for presentations in our policy manual. So it's consistent with council. I just wondered though, is this considered to be a meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners? Or is this a meeting for the public to contribute and commissioners sit in if available, that kind of thing? Or how does that work? What's the I guess the process, or the word protocol comes to mind, but I don't think that's what that applies here.
I'll turn to you if needed. The motions read special online Board of Police Commissioners meeting. So I would assume that it would be a meeting of the commission. But Ian, is that the way you read it as well?
Yeah, to confirm, this would be a meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners. We would have quorum requirements, all those pieces would be in play. Everything would be the same as it is for a normal meeting.
Okay. And yep, we would still, this is by Commissioner Kent, we'd still have the opportunity to ask question clarification from members of the public. Yep, that would still be following our process for sure. Did you have anything you wanted to? All right, questions been called on that. All those in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. All right, that passes.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, have you dealt with the issue of when the police presentation was going to be made? Is that in the
No,
motion?
so we're gonna have that discussion now.
Okay,
so this one,
thank
so
you.
this one, so the motion we just passed would have the presentation in it. In most likely the chief would present again. So now moving on to the next agenda item, which is the deferral of the budget from our December 13th meeting. So the discussion was before I say anything, the discussion was that we have two choices today. So we did get this presentation on our December 13th meeting. We asked for some information from the chief to follow up and come back with more information. That's why the deferral was there. And I'll read really quickly from our minutes. Some of those items it's long, so I'm not going to ask for all of them, but I'll read some of them just so folks know why we had a deferral. So some of the information we asked for was to compare proposed 22-23 operating budget to the previous 3 years operating budget, provide a summary of the benefits of the request and proposed 22-23 operating budget to previous 3 years operating budget, provide reasons for the request enhancements in the proposed 22-23 operating budget, need for public engagement and feedback, identify risks of not funding a requested position, including examples from previous non-funded positions. And there's probably 8 or so more points. So that's why we had a deferral, because there were items, and with those items that we asked for, the chief has changed the presentation to include some of those items that were requested from the commission. So we have a decision to either receive the presentation again with the changes from our last meeting, or we defer the presentation and discussion until our special meeting where we have the public to provide feedback. So before I ask the chief to present or not, I'm just wondering if we can just do a quick round of commissioner. Do we want to receive the presentation again, or do we want to hold off until we get the special meeting? So Commissioner Kent, your hand was up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in moving that we defer both. We have the presentation now in packages, so as commissioners, we can review that public as well. I'm thinking we should defer to the meeting that would be held immediately after the public engagement meeting, so there's no delay, and we should have that in place, maybe well, in our schedules as soon as possible. So I would move that 7.1 be deferred to the Special Board of Police Commission meeting regarding the Halifax Regional Police budget.
Thank you. So that motion, it's seconded, is on the floor, and then we can have a discussion. Seconded by Commissioner McDougall. Anything further, Commissioner Kent?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Akinjojo, I did see your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just hoping that we'll proceed with the presentation because whatever the next meeting has to do would not impact our voting. Our voting will be based on both presentations. So postponing this presentation till further notice, I'm not sure there's a relationship between the two for now. We're going to listen to both presentations and then take our votes after we've received both presentations. I'm just looking at the timeline and the need to keep postponing things forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's not clear in the motion. So just to clarify your point, and maybe Ian, I might need you to weigh in on this. So we would be scheduling a special meeting to give the opportunity, the public opportunity to provide feedback, but the motion didn't say that we would defer decision on approving the budget. I know that the intent from Commissioner Chrisley was that we would defer a decision until after we hear that presentation. So I'm just wondering from your view, Ian, can it be interpreted both ways? And then, or
I would, my perception would be that as written, I would agree with you that there is nothing that says that a decision could not be made prior to scheduling the meeting. I would just note that if a decision has been made, just looking at the intent and the purpose of the meeting as being scheduled, that's more of a governance conversation, just drawing attention to that.
All right. Okay. Yemi, you can, Commissioner, I can do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am not asking that we make a decision on the presentation today. I'm just saying that we listen to the presentation and listen to the public presentation, and thereafter, based on both presentations, we can take a decision. We're not sure how long the public presentation will take, and there's no need to postpone whatever we've agreed to do today. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, that's better, clear. All right, thank you. Commissioner Kent.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's where I was going with it as well. I think that what I had asked, and I'm not sure we got there, was I would put the motion on the floor when the time comes for us to defer the decision. I'm okay with it being with the presentation doing today. It really doesn't matter to me either way at this point. Given the timelines, we have the time to consider it. I know I said the opposite when I first started, but given it some more thought that the presentation is available now, will be available as well it is available on the website to the public. I was thinking, well, then it doesn't have to go that way. I'd really be interested to hear what others folks say, but I also wanted to clarify, I think that's where Yemi was going with it. It wasn't that we were going to vote today. The other benefit of it would be that hopefully Commissioner Critchley would have the opportunity to hear it sometime if he needed it, but that's the way it goes. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Kent. Commissioner McDougall.
Yeah, I was a little bit confused. And thanks for clarifying that, Yemi, because I thought what you were saying was we would vote on the budget and then have the public presentations afterwards. And I thought, well, that doesn't kind of make sense. What's the point of hearing from the public after we've made a decision? So I'm glad you clarified that. And I too would like to hear just the explanation of the presentation, because it adds more information for the public. once we get to a decision of a date and that sort of thing.
So listening to the comments, the majority wants to get the presentation. So we'll continue with the presentation from the chief, and we'll, if commissioners are comfortable, we will defer our discussion until after, but we'll receive the presentation. Is that, are you fine with that? Okay, I see some head nods.
Can I just get confirmation then that
think-
that will be a withdrawal of motion from Commissioner Kent?
Yeah, that's fine. Withdraw it and then we'll put it for something forward after our presentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you, commissioners. Let me just pull up the agenda again. So the motion is already on the floor. It doesn't need to be read again. We do have a new presentation that's included in the package. So what we'll do is we'll receive the presentation from the chief, and then we'll move on to our next items, and then we'll save our discussion pieces, unless there's anything very burning that maybe wasn't covered that we asked for. Then obviously folks can chime in if needed, but we'll save any debate, like discussion debate, for our special meeting. So Chief, the floor is yours and your team, and we'll get the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and through you to the commission. Just want to say good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to bring forward additional information for your consideration. The Halifax Regional Police proposed 2022-2023 budget. As I acknowledged in the first presentation, HRP recognizes that these proposed budget requests come at a time when discussions on defunding and police reform are taking place not only just here in our community, but also across the country. And later today, we'll be hearing from the committee that is leading that work. I also want to acknowledge the time and effort that the committee members have put into that work. And this budget has been brought forward after a great deal of review and thought to shed light on and adequately resource our most critical public safety needs. I also want to take the opportunity to state that we will continue to be a willing participant in any conversation on alternatives that may better serve the HRM community. At the same time, the business of policing, crime solving, and public safety, as it has been set up currently, will continue to need adequate resources. That includes taking a careful look at the gaps that have been left over the years and new ones that are emerging that must be addressed to keep our community safe, while the work continues to bring in alternative practices in the future. We were asked to bring additional information and evidence in support of our request. A good portion of that will be providing you with information on many historic challenges and constraints that we are faced with, which, if not addressed, have the potential to cause ongoing and new public safety risks for our communities. As Chief of Police, I believe one of my core responsibilities is to highlight those gaps and find ways to address them, working with you, the Board of Police Commissioners. The information being presented today will cover each one of the requested areas. I'm also joined today by many subject matter experts internally here at HRP, both sworn and civilian, who are here to answer any questions along with me and provide additional context that may be required. To recap, for the 2022-2023 fiscal year, Halifax Regional Police is proposing an operating budget of $90,876,900. This represents a net operating budget increase of $2.066 million compared to last fiscal year. Before I start, I once again want to acknowledge the work and dedication of the members of the Halifax Regional Police, both sworn and civilian, who work tirelessly to keep this community safe and to serve wherever and whenever needed. My deepest thanks to the HRP team, who works day in and day out with its head held high while dealing with unprecedented challenges. I also want to thank you, the Board of Police Commissioners, for your investment of time and effort in our community's safety. Can we go to the next slide? Now I will open the presentation with a recap of the proposed 2022-2023 budget. Just as a summary, And the next two slides will be followed by information related directly to the request that came out of the last meeting. Next slide. You can see the budget request for the fiscal year, including the HRM target that was given to us. Next slide. This slide just captures the asks themselves, both sworn and civilian, and how they relate to the strategic plan that we have here with HRP and HRM. Next slide. Now we will present information requested by the board, and we will answer questions as we go along, so feel free to stop me during the presentation at any time. Next slide. As you can see, our budget has in fact not changed significantly over the past 3 years. Captured there is the last 3-year budget history, including revenues, expenses, and the net budget. Next slide. Captured here are the summary of the 3-year enhancement requests going back to 1920 up until last year, 21-22. There was no requests in the 2019-20 budget year. In the 2020-2021 budget year, there was requests for supervisors to better ensure that we had proper supervision throughout the organization. That included 2 staff sergeants and 6 sergeants. A budget request of $701,900 was initially requested. $150,500 was initially approved. That unfortunately was withdrawn due to the COVID-related budget recast. Last year, we had a total of $332,000 in requested increases, including 3 resource positions and training for our Journey to Change program. 2 of the positions were approved, the court disposition clerk, the body worn video coordinator, and our Journey to Change training was approved for a total of $230,800. Next slide. The next several slides will offer information on the reasons, the risks, and the evidence related to the asks. Next slide. We have a budget request of 2 detective constables for the sexual assault unit to up our complement by 2 sexual assault investigators. Primarily, these resources would address the increase in investigative volume and complexity of sexual assault files. You can see that the files are increasing steadily since 2011. We had a large increase in 2018 that related to a specific project that involved over 150 victims and several hundred charges that related to that. So that's our blip there. But you can see overall, the cases are going up. The complexity of the crime is going up. And remember, these are some of our most vulnerable victims, victims of sexual assault. And oftentimes, investigations of this nature can lead to the solving of other crimes. Next slide. We have a budget request for 2 detective constables to initiate a hate crime unit within HRP. It's important to note that due to underreporting, we don't have an accurate picture of the extent of these crimes or incidents in Halifax. One of the things that I hear over and over from the community is, Chief, we don't hear back on these issues, so we're not going to report. We need to change that narrative. We need to make sure that victims in this area come forward and share their experiences with us so we can properly investigate. Having these 2 additional resources would allow us to go to a full-time hate crimes unit dedicated to these investigations. Internally, we've also made some changes to ensure that we could properly address that. And there's a risk without a substantive improvement in how we investigate that we will see continued underreporting. Next slide. This slide is in response to providing data on how we track hate crimes currently. As I already mentioned, it's one of the most underreported. You can see there that in 2021, the breakdown of how hate crimes were reported, there were 16 files in total, 15 hate crimes and 1 hate incident. One of the things that we're trying very hard to do is ensure that we properly capture hate incidents to ensure that we can be ahead of the curve should in fact they discuss or show trends for hate crimes. We have established new call types from our accurate and efficient data tracking, and we have increased our training across the organization, both in a general sense through the CPKN network for every member of patrol or members that will be dealing with hate crime. In addition, it's one of the core content topics that we're covering in this year's block training. Next slide. The next request is for one constable to initiate a reintegration pilot program. This will involve over the long term a combination of not only this constable, but others from the wellness unit, disability case management, and potentially externally a psychologist to help our most traumatically affected members return to work in a timely manner, or as in timely a manner as potential. There's some data at the bottom there in regards to other jurisdiction where this program was adopted, and it will primarily respond to short-term absences such as critical incidents and other types of leave, and long-term absences such as major psychological or physical injury. And this is just the start of this particular program, and we look forward to be able to do that. And the theme, as you'll see as we go through, and as I mentioned back in December, is it's this impact that we have on member wellness that's causing a cyclic approach, whether it be through overtime, taking away from other support units to ensure that we staff the front line. So more to come on that as we go forward. Next slide. This is just a repeat of a slide that we showed in December, showing the trend in member long-term absences. We have an opportunity through this budget and the staffing ask here to get ahead of this trend and change the dynamics of it, and ensure that we continually not only keep our members safe and well, but also ensure that we have the appropriate frontline response for our patrol members. Next slide. This next ask is for 8 traffic constables and 1 sergeant. Traffic-related concerns are the most common complaint that we hear from the community. We have frequent redeployments of the traffic unit to our front lines to backfill, and the additional resources will provide increased coverage. So we would be out there more times of the day, increased priority enforcement, increased proactive duties, and an increased education enforcement related to impaired driving. I have the numbers at the bottom there, just in regards to the summary offense tickets that we have been issuing for stunting. While we are very reactive to the stunting problem that we have, it's a major complaint and we have made a dent in it. The additional units here would help us to provide other traffic safety initiatives throughout the municipality, whether it be intersection safety, improved speed enforcement in other areas of the municipality. It really is a big concern coming from the community, and this particular ask will help us meet those concerns and improve the safety conditions of our roads. Next slide. This ask is for 1 case coordinator to enhance our ability to serve victims primarily of domestic violence within our victim services section. The current domestic violence case coordinator is responsible for following up with the most vulnerable individuals where risk is falling through the cracks and further risks of safety. They provide outreach throughout the community, building relationships with vulnerable communities and receiving disclosures, sometimes of human trafficking and other domestic violence and serious crimes that we're able to follow up on. Currently, the Victims Services Case Coordinator is handling a number of cases that change in severity depending on the information that come in. They're continually having to prioritize. This additional resource ask would assist us in making sure that we deliver on our promises to various victims and sometimes get ahead of the curve and prevent increased and more serious offenses. Next slide. Freedom of information requests have been increasing. 2021 was our largest year to date. We've had a considerable increase in the requests for data. It's important that the community be able to get their data. It's also important that we put it through the appropriate lens to ensure that the data we're sharing is appropriate. And it also is important to ensure we do our best to facilitate the timelines that are related to this. This additional resources would help us process requests in a more timely fashion and better inform those seeking information through the Freedom of Information process. Next slide. This unit is for 8 additional call takers and dispatchers in our integrated emergency services unit, needed to address ongoing and increased overtime costs. And as you may know, integrated emergency services handles calls for HRP, RCMP, fire, and EHS. Year over year, it has averaged around 300,000 calls. The complexity of calls has increased, and in many cases, the time taking to process the calls is going up. IES staff are subject to many of the impacts of their frontline officers, and we are seeing the same issues of stress-related injuries and burnout among staff. We need to get ahead of the curve on this. As a result, we are incurring significant overtime in this area, and as well increased dependency on part-time staff and scheduled overtime. We are also now participating in the alert ready notification system, and that has caused extra work for our supervisors, and not primarily related to the issuing of the alerts, but the training and being well prepared to do that should and if it is required. Next slide. This request is patrol constables. 12 patrol constables are required to help us with maintaining our patrol constable capacity. Increasing complexity of crime and specialized investigations, member absence and overtime demands, occupational stress injury trends, redeployments to frontline for critical community safety needs, impact on deployments related to our community engagement, proactive policing. And if I have some more detailed evidence that are personnel and security related, and would be happy to provide that information in camera. Next slide. Staffing at a glance. You've seen the slide before. You saw it in December, and there has been no discernible increase in staff since 2010, and we have pretty much stayed static. Next slide. The other information here is the number of mental health claims, PTSD related claims over the past 10 years. You can see a significant increase starting in about 2018, early 2018, up until July of 2021. So the claims are coming in. We need to be responsive as an organization. The reintegration program helps us with that. The additional resources to lower the stress on our front line helps us with that. And it also stretches out into our civilian staff as well. Next slide. Long-term absence trends. This was one of the questions that came up in December. And there's no standardized reporting that we are aware of on a national average of long-term sickness. What we do know is that StatScan tracks the number of sworn and civilian staff who are off on a variety of long-term leaves. We do that internally as well, do our very best to get our members back to work. And we also know that there's a number of studies going on, particularly with the OPP. That state police officers are 3 times as likely to be affected by occupational stress injuries compared to the general population. Next slide. I was asked to prepare a budget jurisdictional scan with some of our similar cities. And on this information, I will note that finding comparators for things as complex as budgets is never simple. It is not simply an issue of agreeing on what makes them like cities, but also on a short turnaround, the information is not always readily available. For some degree of standardization, we consulted HRM with comparators that they have used in the past for different purposes. These municipal police services featured in this table are from one of the recent such comparators lists that was determined to be relevant, where we were able to find the requested information. You will find on this list municipalities that have many shared characteristics of Halifax. In some cases, as a growing city, a capital city, a port city, or having an airport or being a regional hub. The data on budget was received directly from this in some cases, and some from their websites. You will see that Halifax is by no means unique in requesting additional resources. Next slide. Some of the information related to current wellness programs. Over in our support area of our police service, under Deputy Chief McCombs, staff are working very, very hard to ensure that we are providing the best and most current wellness programs for our members, and at the same time, those members that are in need of support are getting that support as often as possible. One program that is not listed up there is the Traumatic Psychological Injury Program, launched by the Workers' Compensation Board. It now covers our members for job-related injuries. Next slide. This is just a continuation of some of the programs that we have and are running on a regular basis. Next slide. Just in regards to recruitment needs and programs, we are regularly recruiting, whether it be existing and serving police officers or through our cadet science program. And in 2020, we had 19 retirements and with an average of 31.2 years service. In 2021, we had 14 retirements. And we also had others who were leaving and looking for other lines of work. So we're regularly out in front, recruiting, training. We have a cadet sciences program that's just about to wrap up with 20 members projected to graduate. We're not there yet, but that is the way that it's looking. Next slide. And this slide gives you the numbers of how we've been, the people that are interested in policing and the people that we've been able to hire. So a total of 28 experienced officers over the last 2 years, and 43 by the time we have our graduates at the end of February. Again, that class is still in session. Next slide. This was another question coming out of December, the December meeting. The largest spike for overtime has been the area of callbacks. These are leading to the factors discussed earlier, most notably member absences and resourcing complaints. And you know, this was the notable point about getting the patrol officers in place. If we have the patrol officers in place, we can reduce the overtime. We can also reduce the amount of call-ins that we have. Members are getting tired. They're repeatedly being asked to be called in to fill up gaps, and it's even made more difficult through the latest wave of COVID. But as you can see, 2020 was an anomaly because it was the COVID year. Our overtime has basically skyrocketed on the outside, and we currently don't see any changes in that. We do need to address the staffing issue at the front line, and we're hoping that the board will be responsive to the request. And it's important also to remember that when the frontline staff are being taxed and we don't have the positions being filled, we have to reach out to our support units, whether they be community response officers, school liaison officers, traffic unit, quick response unit, any of the other units that can help us, CRCP. We were regularly having to go to those units to make sure that we can stay above our complement, or at least at our complement moving forward. And that is the cycle that we're trying to break here by addressing the issue now. I also want to reiterate that if we don't act now, it takes about 12 months or so, maybe even a little bit longer, to get some of these staffing resources in place. So if it's approved in April of 2022, April of this year by council, we won't see a discernible response from that until probably April of 2023. So we need to get ahead of the curve here, and we need to start taking some action to help us for the long term. Next slide. There was a request about the crime severity index, and the crime severity index is not generally used as a mechanism for police resource planning, to my knowledge. It is a mechanism to gauge the overall crime severity, and it brings into consideration overall crime types and counts. And the fact that CSI has gone down over the years can be an indication of a number of factors. The way we have planned for longer staffing needs here has historically relied on calls for service, crime trends, and insights that we gain from our CommStat process. However, it is clear that we have not kept pace with our growth. We have to do better in terms of monitoring member absences and underlying causes of the priority response review is meant to help provide additional insights to the use of those resources. So while we monitor CSI and report on it, it is not indicative of the time staff spend on policing or the time required to solve crime. Next slide. Just wanted to remind the board how staffing has basically stayed static. Next slide. And here is the indicator. If you look at the comparator services, a number of them have increased staffing in relation to population growth. Our population has been growing pretty steadily since 2015, could argue even back as long as 2012. And we have not responded in kind with an increase in resources, particularly at the front line. Next slide. Subject to any questions the board may have, that's my presentation.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that follow-up presentation. So are there any questions of clarification that members, again, so we're gonna defer decision until our special meeting, but questions of clarification definitely are more than welcome at this time. So Commissioner McDougall and then Commissioner Kent.
Thank you, Chief. I have a couple of questions. My first one is related to your information about hate crime. What's the difference between a hate crime and an incident?
Criminal code versus? Yes. So thanks, Commissioner. So a hate crime is just that, a hate crime, and there's charges once determined under the criminal code. Hate incident is some interaction or other reportable incident that details something that might have underlying hate within it, but doesn't meet the threshold of a criminal offense. And we want to be able to track both. Obviously, hate crimes are, much more severe in the fact that they can result in criminal charges. Incidents need to be tracked across the region. It speaks to trends and other things that we might be able to get ahead of. And that's why we're looking to have this unit who will be well-trained, well-educated, and will have, hopefully, if they get in place, build some bridges and communication links within vulnerable and diverse communities so we can get ahead of some of these things.
Thank you. My next question relates to members who are off on various categories of leave. And I just wondered who's covering pay or salary, that kind of thing, for extended sick leave, on the job injury, or long-term disability. Is that covered by insurance or by workers' comp, or?
Yeah, you can zoom it out a bit. Thanks, Commissioner. I'm going to bring Deputy Chief McCombs into the conversation, and he can answer that question for you.
And through you, Chair, it depends on the type of leave. You know, if it's covered by workers' compensation, they pay a portion, the employer pays a portion. If they're on long-term disability, that would be covered by the insurer. If it's employer sick time, it would be paid by the employers. So it depends on the type of leave that they're on, where the costing comes from.
Okay, thank you. And I did have a question about Alert Ready, and was wondering, why has that changed the need for resources? What does Alert Ready do to you as a service?
So the Alert Ready program, through you, Chair, to the Commissioner, the Alert Ready program has been in place for a long time, has been through a lot of review since April of 2020. And what that allows us to do is to directly notify affected members of the community of any incident that we would like to get a hold of them of. It's through phones, other media, TVs, radios, all those kind of things. So it allows us to directly access the Alert Ready program without going through EMO to have to set that up. So we, along with the RCMP, have taken on the responsibility of directly accessing this. The spin-off to that is there are some things that have to happen to be able to do it. It happens out of our IES section. Our supervisors are trained in it, and a number of other members of the service. So if we need to notify the community about a high-risk event, some sort of crime to help them out, we're able to do that directly without going through EMO.
Thank you. And my last, it's not a question, but a comment, seeing the need for more support for victim services is something I think is a really important change. And I'm in awe of the volunteers who commit their time and support to this program. And so I'm just interested to see this item in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to just keep mine to clarification questions. I'll be saving my comments for when we do get around to the budget debate. Sorry, to the motion debate. Specifically, Chief, page 7 of your presentation, I just want to get to where I understand what's being presented. The 2021 budget, you had requested enhancements of the court disposition clerk, the body worn camera, online training technician that was not approved, and journey to change funding approved, but you only received, or you requested 332 and 23800 was approved. So are you experiencing gaps in these positions now, or were you able to adjust your operating to accommodate the capacity that you were looking for those areas? So I'll start.
Yep.
Sorry, I'll start there. I've got a few more questions. Is it better, Mr. Chair, if I just ask them all and let them answer? How do you want to do this?
That might work. That way you don't run out of time.
Okay, so there's that one. Then page 16, the FOIPOP intake analysts, you're looking for additional support intake analysts, one additional. Excuse me, can you tell me how many we actually have right now on staff? That's page 16. And then my final question for now is page 25 on recruitment needs and programs. Excuse me, the number of retiring members has been on the rise and or seeking a career change. So I'm really curious on how many have left our force that were not retiring. And can you tell us if, like, why they're leaving? Do you do exit interviews and such, and give us a sense of why are members leaving this service here in HRM? So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you.
For now.
Kent, and I'll give Chief an opportunity to speak on those.
Super. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Chair, to the Commissioner. So currently, for the Freedom of Information intake clerk, we currently have one. If this request is approved, that'll give us two. In regards to the items that are not approved periodically through the request process, we generally either try to make some changes internally through readjustments to meet the need if we can, or sometimes if we cannot meet the need internally, we have to go without the service. And it just depends. We do our very best to try to make adjustments if we cannot get the funding. And sometimes we're able to. The example is the request for supervision. We were able to get those requests for supervision in place through a number of changes internally, but we had to take supervisors away from other areas. So, and sometimes those areas are not operating anymore. So it just depends on a prioritization of the services, and we have to make some decisions, sometimes very hard decisions on what we do and how we deliver the service, with the fundamental response always that we meet our frontline policing needs, particularly reporting or responding to priority 1 and 2 calls for service. And for your last question on page 25, I'm going to turn it back over to Deputy Chief.
Can I just ask a quick question further to what you just said on the staffing increases? Are you able to give us a little sense on what areas in particular relation to each of those that you were not able to fulfill internally, just so I have a better sense of it?
For the 2021, 2022, or all of them?
Just the 21, 22. I'm trying to get a sense of where, do we still have gaps in there that you were not able to fulfill? Specific.
So the one position that was not approved is the online training technician. So we continue to find other alternatives, but we were never able to get that position filled. So although there is some online training provided, it's not provided to the extent that we could if we had that position in place. So that's that one. Do you want me to go into the body worn video coordinator? I know I've reported a couple times in the past to the board. Would you like the information on that again?
Only if you're telling me that part of that was not covered. If it was served, then great. If not, I'm interested in those that we were not able to cover.
Yeah, it was served, and the only thing that was not covered from last year was the online training technician that we requested.
Great, thanks.
And to answer your other question, with respect to the employees that are leaving, as part of our offboarding process, there is exit interviews. We attempt to do exit interviews for everybody who's leaving. And as the chief mentioned earlier, where we're recruiting experienced police officers, we're not immune to it as well, that other agencies are recruiting our officers. So I don't have the exact number, but the majority of our people that leave here go to other police agencies and continue being police officers in other areas, whether it's to try to get back home or for whatever reasons they go to other police agencies.
And a lot of times, Commissioner, that is, to go back home, to return to where, family is, or sometimes, people are going for other relationship reasons. And for the same reasons that we get them coming here, as the deputy said, our members are leaving as well.
Anything further, Commissioner Kent?
Thank you, not just yet.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anybody else with their hand up. So Commissioner McDougall, your mic unmuted. Did you have a question? Okay. I got some questions that were messaged to me from Commissioner Critchley just a moment ago. So I'm just gonna read them. So main issues, one is don't feel like we have all the data to understand the current issues with understaffing and what caused them. Example, the graph has no scale, doesn't account for WCB, and total overtime spending hasn't gone up, or what an effective solution would be hiring more staff, wouldn't address underlying issues, need to canvass research, return to work. Programs both in policing and other sectors. Presentation doesn't address the Halifax and second most heavily policed municipality in Canada, 208 officers per 100,000 population compared to national average of 183 per 100,000 per 2019 StatsCan data. Behind only Montreal at 2011 per 100, also doesn't look at per capita spending. For the peer cities identified, HRP spends 393 per capita compared to 276 in London. Didn't meet requests to address issue with Crime Severity Act Index. HRM significantly lower than national average and has been decreasing steadily for 10 years. Other than the study tickets, there are no data presenting on support for the request for traffic officers. Very concerning that addressing mental health is cited as a reason for more officers. Basically, everyone, including most police groups, agree that policing needs to stop responding to wellness checks. So I don't know if Chief, if there's anything you want to respond or comment on those comments from Commissioner Critchley or not.
So thanks, Chair. And there's a number of items there that some of that may relate to the in-camera portion that we have today. The other piece I would say is that we're very unique here in HRM, policed by two agencies, the RCMP and HRP. When you actually take the municipality as a whole, our cop to pop ratio is 166 per 100,000. And the reason that's significant and the reason that should be taken into consideration is because of our integrated model. Not only are we integrated in CID and records and courts, but we are also integrated in the sense that we regularly provide assistance for each other in each other's jurisdiction from a patrol perspective. So there's much more information that should be considered in regards to cop to pop. And just in particular on the traffic unit, because I didn't write down all the questions, but happy to continue the dialogue at some point. This ask for the traffic unit is all really about community and road safety. We've had a number of motor vehicle collisions, many tragic in nature. Our traffic unit does its very best to be out there and proactively patrol the streets, reactively patrol the streets, and try to, through a platform of engagement, education, and enforcement, try to change the behavior of our drivers. I know that we are headed at some point in time to a mechanical ability to enforce the traffic laws, and perhaps that's where we go if that is the will of the community, the board, and council. But the number one complaint that we get is in regards to traffic enforcement, and as I say, this particular ask would help us address that. But really, it is a what would you like to see, and what kind of difference would we like to make, knowing that we're always going to be out there and always doing that. That is primarily the request for traffic officers. And I know there was a number of other questions in there, but those are the two that were jumping out at me, and I hope that helps.
Oh, that's great. And what I'll do is I'll send those questions just in case there's something you want to include for next presentation, just so you have them. Or maybe I'll get, if Commissioner Critchley feels better, I'll get him to send that to you directly. So thanks again, everybody, for the discussion. And really quickly, some of the questions that I had clarification was mentioned. The three things that I will raise, let me just open up my notes so I can see them all. So the first one is, identifying the risks. In one of the questions I had was, I didn't see that, but as you clarify that there are some things that you can't share in public. So we would have to go on camera for some of the details that I have questions on. So I won't speak on that, but I did make note of, I didn't see that information, but I understand you're ready to present it if we need it. The information that you just mentioned, so I did have the same information related to the per capita piece, which I had the same information that Commissioner Critchley has, but you mentioning that with the joint force, it's a number a little different. So if you could, maybe for our next time you present, because you're going to present again, having that in the slide would be very worthwhile for us to kind of understand that data. So that if you could include it, that'd be great. So I won't speak on that, because I did have questions around the peer city. So I won't go further on that one. The other one was evidence around the specific number of personnel requested. So, and maybe this again is related to in-camera, because I felt that there still wasn't enough information related to that, but with getting more details, I'm seeing you shaking your head. So in camera, we need to talk about some of the more detailed personnel reasoning for that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can certainly have that conversation there. And just on the cop to pop piece, I would also, and we can put it on a slide for sure for the next meeting. It's important to consider that the urban core of Halifax, where population grows and then secedes because people are going to their homes or they're leaving for being here on holiday and then they leave. So, not only are we a capital city and a port city, we're a high tourism city. We have a high education. We have our swelling of our population when school's in session. We have an entertainment district that's second to none. So there are a number of other factors that contribute to our population and how they change. But certainly we'll provide all that information into a slide so we can have a more robust discussion.
Thank you. And the only other one that I didn't see included in there was when we spoke about the long-term absence trend. There was nothing related to the national average piece. So I don't know if that's data that's just difficult to get, but I didn't see that in the presentation related to and I'll just read what was in our motion. Detail the interaction between Halifax Regional Police member, long-term absence trends, and authorized police strength and how these compare to the national average.
Chair, what slide is that, please?
So that was from the meeting minutes from our previous December 13th. So when I looked at when I looked at page 13 on the slides, I just didn't see the comparable of how that relates to the national average.
I'm just trying to find the page, if you'll just bear with me.
Yep, so page 13 is where you have the long-term absence trends on your presentation.
13.
No, it's traffic unit.
Or slide 13.
Okay, and you're referring to our internal long-term absence trends?
Yeah, and how that relates to the national average.
I'm just looking for the slide. If I can find it, I will have more information for you.
Yeah,
And I believe 22 would be the one that has the graph.
That's not it. That's the insurance status. Thank you. Just bear with me, Chair. We're just trying to find the slide. For some reason, it's escaping us.
Yeah. So all this say is, and this is fine. I just don't think I didn't see the national average piece, and there might be something that needs to be included for the next.
Yeah. What I can tell you is that there's no standard national average that we were able to find.
Okay.
We do have some basic information from StatsCan on the number of officers in the country, the number of civilian people in the impact, and how many people are off. And we do have that information, but no standardization of the long-term absences across the country that we're aware of.
Okay, and if you want to just throw that in the corresponding slide for next time, just because that was one of the requests, just to say that that information isn't available, that's helpful.
Okay, I think we may have found it.
Okay.
The elusive slide, we found it. It's actually slide 21.
21, okay.
And, yeah, and the last budget talks about the standardized process. And
okay, yeah,
but
I see it.
So the best information we have, and I'll share it with you because I do have it here, is that as of May 15th, 2019, Canada-wide, there were a total of 68,718, an equivalent of 31,699 full-time civilian staff. This is right from StatsCan.
Right.
Of this overall number, 5,090 were on leave of 12 weeks or more during the year. and 67% of this number were police officers. And of the police officers on long-term, they were on 67% were on leave for medical reasons, which includes long-term disability, mental health, medical emergencies, and injury on duty. And that's the best information we could get, and it was right from StatsCan. So
Okay.
that's the best we have. Still don't believe that it's standardized across the country. It's just an information piece.
Right.
But I can tell you anecdotally, at least in speaking with my colleagues, many of us are facing the same issues across the country.
If you could, just so we have that for the record, if you could put that information in the slide, that'd be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
Excellent. Okay, so that's it for me. And thank you, commissioners. I see nobody else. They're just doing some questions of clarification. So a couple additions will come at our next presentation, and again, we'll try to make sure that next special meeting where we'll get the public involved will happen sooner than later. We, as the commission, also have a deadline that we have to meet for another related item. So I'm assuming we'll have to schedule that sooner than later. So not going to ask for the vote on this because we're going to save that. Just going to get situated here. All right, so we already dealt with the request from Commissioner Critchley. So now we're moving on to 8.1, correspondence.
Mr. Chair, do we not have to defer that where it's an agenda item? I would think we have to defer 7.1.
All right, you're right. So we'll call for a motion to defer that for the special meeting.
Thank you. Yes, I'll move that item 7.1 be deferred to a special Board of Police Commissioners. Oh, no, here we have the new version. That the Board of Police Commissioners defer item 7.1 Halifax Regional Police 2022-23 proposed operating budget to be deferred to the special Board of Police Commissioners meeting regarding the Halifax Board of Regional Board Police budget. And I'd like to speak to that, Mr. Chair, if it's seconded.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Blackburn.
Yeah, thank you. So that's in keeping with what we had discussions around before. We do want to have a chance to digest this as well, which is great. I'm just wondering, should we identify in there anywhere, or at least staff know that we're looking for this to be as soon as possible after we do our community engagement piece? We don't want to delay all of the processes by which this has to make its way through on giving Chief Kinsella and his staff the opportunity to make any adjustments should we be looking that way. But we are looking for that community engagement piece to be in place. So we want to keep those very close together as much as we can. And I would encourage all of our commissioners to work hard within our own scheduling to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from members? No comments. Question on the deferral.
Call for the question.
Question's been called. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. All right, so that will be deferred for the special meeting that will involve the public. So now moving on, so thank you for stopping me, Commissioner. Moving on to 8.1, correspondence. And correspondence report.
Sorry, Chair Smith, I can confirm that correspondence has been received for items 7.1, 8.3.1, and 10.2.1, and that correspondence has been circulated to all members of the Board of Police Commissioners.
Thank you. 8.2 petitions. Any petitions from members? So moving on to presentations, which we have 2 today. 8.3.1 presentation regarding the proposed budget increase from Halifax Police, Bad Neighbors, and this is from Collins Ellison. And do we have Collins in the meeting?
Hi, Collins. This is Andrea speaking from the clerk's office. In order to promote you to the to be able to speak at the Zoom meeting, you're going to be getting a prompt asking you to agree to being promoted to panelist. Can you please click OK? Thank you. Chair Smith, Collins is now joined as a panelist.
Okay, great. And if you're able to go off mute to make sure we can hear you, that'd be great. Colin?
Yeah, hello there.
Hello,
sorry,
welcome.
The video feed is not working quite yet.
Not a worry. You can hear us fine and we can hear you. So you have 5 minutes. Thanks for joining us today and the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for hosting this discussion today, Council. I'd like to start off by, I guess, just giving a bit of an idea of who I am. I'm a longtime resident of the HRM, 28 years old, African Nova Scotian. I've had dealings with the criminal justice system in relation to police, and part of those interactions were at a time period where I was homeless by definition. I was underhoused chronically, and my interactions with police were entirely negative at those times. As I've been in search of relief or support in terms of housing support. I wasn't able to find any, unfortunately. To give you more of a basic time period, this was at about 2019 into May of 2020. So it was really the start of the pandemic at these times. And I basically didn't have anywhere to live that was safe. I turned to family and friends for support. I had turned to community members. Unfortunately, it seemed neither my family nor any of my community members had the capacity to help. The police had been called on me a couple of times, basically, as I had some unwanted contact. But I think one or two times it was with a family member, and another time it was with a different person. I guess a kind of a well-known community advocate. But unfortunately, when the police came to speak with me at these times, their concern was not so ever my well-being. I wasn't asked about my housing situation. I wasn't asked about my mental health predicaments at the time, which were not so great. I felt more or less that I was bullied, and that yeah, it's just there's generally no concern whatsoever for me as a human, which was very disconcerting. As I wouldn't imagine that that's how anyone should have been treated. Sorry, I'm just going to start the video here right now as well. So yeah, as you can see behind me here, I think People's Practice is called, is basically a direct reflection of how the HRM and the HRP, by extent, have treated persons experiencing homelessness. And yeah, I was at a severe loss of words when I witnessed kind of what went on in the summertime, just this past year, in 2021, assuming everyone knows what had happened, really. A lot of persons who were experiencing homelessness and who were advocating for persons experiencing homelessness were criminalized. And I think that's shameful. I think that's, it's something that really is just unacceptable. And as part of that, I think mental health needs to be taken into account. Not only criminalization of people in poverty, but also how it impacts their mental health, all play into an effect. So part of my presentation as well, I was looking to use just a few articles, recent articles, one by Jamie Livingston from the Nova Scotia Advocate. As well, there was another article as mental health called Spike across Nova Scotia. The police forces have been pleading for help. I had sent both of these in direct links through an email to the person I've been coordinating my participation in these events with. So I believe in Andrea Lavasi Wood might have those links. I wasn't entirely certain of the presentation itself and how I might make those accessible to anyone viewing, but these articles both suggest that the police are not well functioning when it comes to providing mental health support. And this is especially difficult for persons who, like myself at the time in 2019, 2020, were experiencing homelessness. And so I really feel as though some of these funds need to be redirected in towards better accessibility for shelters. I feel that would be definitely that's well needed within the HRM. I also feel as though mental health support is something that definitely needs to be expanded upon, and just within the HRM's overall budget for the HRP as is, I think that there should be an expansion of of the mobile mental health crisis team from the funds that have already been provided. And when I look at
sorry, 30 seconds remaining in your presentation.
Yeah, excuse me. So yeah, when I look at the functions of the mobile mental health crisis team, they're not generally inclusive of persons who are under criminal investigations. They're not inclusive of persons who may have any number of petty criminal offenses. I think that officers with who have responded to these sorts of events need to have specific units in both the criminal investigation division and the patrol division, and that's something that needs to be had using the existing funds already. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allison, for your presentation. And we have a question of clarification from Commissioner Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start by saying it's so good to see your face, Collins. For those on the commission, I have known Collins for a very long time, and that's for none of him as a young man and growing up. And I just, I'm very proud of you, Collins, and I just want to say that now because you're here in front of me. I'm glad to hear that you have shared your story, and I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. These are the things that we do need to hear. I know we can only speak, I certainly can speak from a commissioner's point of view today, that working to support unhoused individuals is often complex, but I know we can do better, and I think that's what we're striving for constantly. And hearing your perspective is super helpful. I certainly am sorry about the events that happened last year at the People's Park, and you know, I believe strongly that HRM has worked hard to learn from that. As commissioners as well, we continue to speak of it. I think that your points around mental health absolutely has to be taken into consideration. And I want to make sure that that our staff follow up with us to make sure we get those links, because I certainly want to take advantage of your suggestion to read those. I do have a question specifically, because you know, probably you're aware that we will be receiving the defunding report from the committee that was mandated through this commission. And we'll be receiving that today. There's a lot to consider in there, and there's a lot of pieces that have referenced some of the pieces that you're talking about. I wondered if you had a chance to engage in that process yourself, and perhaps if not, I want to extend an invitation to open the avenue for you to continue to reach out to us and share what you, I'd encourage you to read that and see if there's anything else you, with your story, would like to contribute to any of our consideration. Because the report has been, that committee has done their work and they're submitting it, it doesn't mean that's the end of the conversation. In fact, I hope that it's actually the opposite. So I would encourage you to continue to share your perspective on that as you go forward. So just a question of, did you get a chance to engage in that at all, and hopefully you'd be interested in continuing this dialogue.
Yes, thank you, Becky. If you're referring to the 219-page report that's just been recently published, yes, I have had a chance to read through much of the report. I think, from what I've understood, the vast majority of respondents who identify as persons having disabilities are in favor of defunding the police, and I think that's a reflection of possibly persons who may have mental health concerns. And I think, as again, I can only speak anecdotally, but my interactions with police, when I have had instances of unfavorable mental health conditions, they've not been good. And so, just again, speaking as to that, once again, when I was finding myself underhoused chronically, it was never a concern of the police who were responding to ask me about my living conditions. And I think that, as again, I suggested, just reflecting upon what happened in 2021 over the summertime, I think that when we criminalize persons experiencing homelessness, I guess that's some very thin ice to tread there, because even understanding as rental increases are expected to happen, even with the assumed rent cap in place until, I believe, the end of 2023, a lot more people are finding it more difficult to afford just a general cost of living these days. So I think that the HRM needs to be proactive in how it polices people who are experiencing, again, conditions of being underhoused or homelessness again. And to that as well, not just on the police's perspective, but I also think that the residential tenancy board needs to, there needs to be better looks taken into those services as well. As for police, again, I touched on it with the mobile mental health crisis team. I would propose that whenever they respond to a particular incident, if they know persons involved who have had mental health concerns of the past, if they could be able to identify those along with social workers or other mental health professionals, that I think would lead to a de-escalation of a lot of circumstances, which at this point lead to unnecessary periods of incarceration. They lead to necessary, again, criminalizations of persons who really are just in a lot of need of help. So thank you again, Council, for listening to my presentation. I'm sorry I wasn't able to give you the links to these articles, which I've read, but I think that as long as these discussions are happening, I think that there is a way to better service the overall HRM. So thank you again.
Thank you, and we'll make sure we send those links around to the commissioners so they can have that information. And again, thank you for being here, and knowing you for a long time, I totally appreciate your perspective that you're bringing to the commission today. So thanks, and we'll go to our next presentation, which is 8.3.2, Halifax District Royal Canadian Mounted Police in overarching provincial structure. So we have our friends from the province here who are going to present to us.
Hi there, just want to confirm that the commission can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Perfect. And so we do have a slide deck presentation, I believe. Perfect. Thank you. So firstly, I want to say thank you to the Commission for inviting us to give this presentation today. My name is Haley Crichton. I'm currently the Executive Director of Public Safety and Security Division for the Department of Justice, and I'm joined by my colleagues today, Toyin Akindoju, who's the Executive Director of Finance Division, Stephen Ong, our Director of Contracts with Finance Division, and Donna Jewers, who serves as our RCMP liaison to the Department of Justice. Next slide, please. So today's presentation is really kind of a high-level presentation on how the Department of Justice or how Public Safety Division is involved in managing the contract and our reporting relationship, and how we can use this time to open lines of communication between the Commission and Public Safety Division. So really, this presentation is being done in hopes that it's going to serve as a jumping-off point for an ongoing relationship between our divisions and this board regarding the management of the police service agreement. And it is one that we give councils and boards across Nova Scotia as well. Respecting the time frame that we have to provide this presentation today, some slides we'll go through a little bit quickly, but it's in hopes to get to kind of the meat of the presentation. But of course, if there's questions on clarification for some slides that I'll move through more quickly, please just let us know at the end and we'll be more than happy to provide that clarification. So if you wouldn't mind, please, I will actually ask you to skip to slide 6. Slides 2 to 6 are really about the organization of the division itself. And so again, respecting our time limitations, we can go back to those if required. So the first 2 slides are really about the authority that the province has to contract the RCMP for service provision. So Section 5 of the Police Act prescribes that the Minister of Justice has overarching responsibility for law enforcement, and this includes ensuring that an adequate and effective level of policing is maintained. And I put a point here that the concept of level of policing is really much broader than just the number of personnel. There are complex metrics that are used, including geography, calls for service, the nature of the calls, etc., that are all kind of built into this idea of level of policing service. Policing is also guided in Nova Scotia by provincial policing standards, which are the base minimum standards that police agencies across the province must meet. Next slide, please. So pursuant to Section 5 of the Police Act, policing is a municipal responsibility. And the options available to municipalities for the selection of police services are found in Section 36 of the Nova Scotia Police Act and requires approval of the Minister of Justice. So of course, the Halifax Regional Municipality Organization is unique across Canada. It is the only area in which there are 2 police forces responsible for enforcement within one municipality. So it's a very kind of specific organization of policing, if you will. Next slide, please. So Public Safety and Security Division is one division within the Department of Justice, and we are responsible for oversight over a number of different programs across the province, one of which being policing services. So there's a list there of some of the other programs that we're responsible for, and all of them are to promote, encourage, or maintain public safety across Nova Scotia. So that includes policing, the security programs, so oversight over the private security industry, safer communities and neighborhoods, CyberScan, the Firearms Office, and the Additional Officer Program as well, which was previously known as the Boots on the Street Initiative. Next slide, please. And so here I just wanted to provide a little bit of information about our division's relationship to police governance across Nova Scotia. So we do have a connection to boards of police commissioners across Nova Scotia and also to police advisory boards. And our division is responsible for training upon request for these boards. And we go out and we provide those previously in person, but of course now we're switching to Zoom. We also hold monthly meetings with the president of the Nova Scotia Association of Police Governance, which, as you know, feeds into the Canadian Association for Police Governance. And I note that the current president of the Canadian Association of Police Governance is Wayne Talbot, who's a commissioner for Truro Police. Given the unique reporting structure, though, I think it's important to delineate the difference between police advisory boards and police boards of commissioners, and therefore the very unique reporting structure that exists in Halifax. And I noted in the police board bylaws from the municipality, section 3F, and this really kind of speaks to the reason why we're here and happy to present to the Board of Police Commissioners. So essentially it says that in discussing the budget, the Department of Justice is a part of those conversations because we are the contract holder for the RCMP. So oftentimes there are questions that are asked that are quite nuanced related to finance, and it's really the Department of Justice that holds that information for the contract overall. So we are the most appropriate body for those questions to be asked to. Next slide, please. And when I talk about the agreement and the reporting structure and why it's we're the contract holder and so therefore the reporting structure is different, I'm talking about the police service agreement. So it is the 26 article agreement that outlines the roles and responsibilities for the two contract partners, which is Canada and Nova Scotia, as well as our service provider, which is the RCMP. So it's important to note here that the RCMP are not a party to the contract, and rather they are a service provider, again, speaking to the different reporting relationship. And that's why it looks different to this board when we come and have these discussions versus HRP, where it's a more direct reporting relationship. We also have the role of the RCMP liaison to the Department of Justice. And this role is crucial, and it serves as a contact point for municipalities to have a line of contact into the Department of Justice to bring forward concerns, to coordinate our presentations to boards. It's really a vital position that we have that helps us to kind of communicate more directly with municipalities, despite the contract being an overarching contract. And there is a difference between operational information versus contractual information. So of course, even though we're the contract holder, we do not direct the operation of police, and therefore information about operations is provided most appropriately by the RCMP. So as a part of this agreement, the RCMP provided an annual budget cap for the entirety of the PPSA, and it denotes funding for each fiscal year. And the way that this budget is reported throughout the year to the Department of Justice is quite robust, but also standardized. So there are national reporting requirements that the RCMP follows to ensure that we are able to receive all the information that's required. Next slide, please. So the cost share for the Provincial Policing Service Agreement is a 70-30 cost split. So 70% of the cost is provincial and 30% is supplemented by the Government of Canada. So Halifax Regional Municipality was grandfathered into the 2012 negotiation, and so it maintains a 70-30 cost share arrangement despite population size. So pursuant to the agreement, if Halifax were to exit and try to rejoin the agreement today, due to the population size, the cost share would actually be a 90-10 split under a municipal police service agreement. So it would change the organization of the agreement. So the province is also responsible for the cost of some central services, thus reducing costs to municipalities as well. The legislation that provides the Department of Justice the authority to recover costs for the RCMP from municipalities is the service exchange legislation, and this leads to direct billing of municipalities, which we do per officer building, and I'll give more information on that in the next slide. We also function to manage the First Nations policing program as well, and there is a different cost share for that program, which is 52% province and 48%, excuse me, Government of Canada. Next slide, please. So we wanted to provide information on how the RCMP budget is determined at the province level. So each division in its totality submits their multi-year financial plan by June 1st of each year, and that's stipulated under an article of the agreement itself. So it reflects the RCMP's determination of need, and it's a standard formal report that's provided to the Department of Justice. And we analyze that report with a lot of communication back and forth between the division. And it's really a robust process that's cyclical and ongoing annually, such that what comes in the multi-year financial plan is very rarely a surprise to the Department of Justice. We usually have a good understanding of what we will see in that plan. And some of the analysis includes looking at things like percentage workflow increases and things like that to ensure that we have a good understanding of what the ask really is. So we perform that analysis, and then it is presented to the minister for approval and then submitted to our Treasury Board for approval. The RCMP is then notified of their annual budget allocation, and then the notification is sent to municipalities. So this is our provincial kind of process for determining the budget. And while the federal government does not set the budget for us, they are involved in that process. The multi-year financial plan is also sent to Ottawa as well, and to RCMP national headquarters as well. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines the number of resources that are currently in Halifax District RCMPs. Next slide, please. And some of the equipment assets that are also in Halifax District, inclusive of access to vessels, so on the water, and also an acknowledgement that we do cost share for aircrafts, and those are shared within the Atlantic provinces. So the per officer billing model that I referred to earlier is the totality of the RCMP annual budget minus the costs associated with shared services, and divided by the total number of FTE positions to come to the average per officer cost. So this cost per officer is the same for all officers regardless of rank, and municipalities are billed based on the number of officers they have in their area. So of course this is one area that we'll be more than happy to give more information, perhaps at another meeting when we have a little bit more time. There's also a vacancy factor, and this per officer cost is adjusted at the end of the year to account for vacant positions that are in the division as well. Next slide, please. And some of the unseen assets that we wanted to kind of touch on are, access to federal policing resources, as the RCMP is a federal policing body as well, and also access to cross-Canada policing support. So in times of emergency or in exigent circumstances, there are provisions in the contract that allow us to, quote, tap into those resources and bring in members of the RCMP from across the country. Because training is standardized, the officers that are coming in from jurisdictions elsewhere have the same training as those in our province, so they can be moved around. And this is also true for equipment as well. So it's human resources can be moved, but so too can equipment for things like aircraft and fleet. Next slide, please. So in the next couple of slides, we have a list of some of the specialized services that are provided by the RCMP as part of the provincial policing contract. But we do recognize that seeing a list of services doesn't really tangibly give an idea of what exactly they do and how that's kind of put into practice. So if you wouldn't mind, please, next slide. And next slide, please. And finally, next slide, please. So this is our example of how many resources are actually utilized in one emergency situation. So we're giving the example of the missing child in North Preston investigation, and that was in October of 2021. And resulting from that call for service, each one of the bubbles here represents a resource that was utilized or a specialized service that was utilized to bring that file to conclusion. So you can see that one file actually touches so many different departments, units, integrated units. So it's really kind of imperative that we view this in a more holistic lens of we are investing this in our provincial service agreement, and these resources, these investments are used in emergency situations. And we hope that this is kind of a tangible example of how that comes into practice. And there's, some are more complicated, like air services, to have something come in from another jurisdiction to ensure we have that eye line and oversight for a situation such as that. And thankfully, that 10-year-old boy was located safe. Next slide, please. So next, we want to talk quickly about vacancies and mitigation, because I know that that's an area that there were questions, and it's an important topic. And so there is the Employee and Management Relations Office that's located in Dartmouth in headquarters, and they focus on health promotion, protection from hazards, prevention of illness and injury, and they're really responsible for following regular members and civilian members when they're ill or injured and facilitating their return to the workplace. Next slide, please. So currently, as the previous slide noted, there are 183 established regular member positions in Halifax District. So regular members are just the word for police officers in Halifax District. Right now, there are 14 soft vacancies, which is a 7% vacancy rate, and 3 hard vacancies. So of course, soft vacancies, we differentiate between the two. Soft vacancies are those in which a person actually still occupies the position, but they're off on long-term sick leave, maternity leave, paternity leave, etc. This does not include those who are graduated return to work. Hard vacancies are those where the position is actually vacant. So there are a number of things that are done to try and mitigate this vacancy factor. So occupational health and services for H division is comprised of a medical doctor, a health services officer, 2 clinical psychologists, 3 nurses, a manager, and admin staff. And really what they focus on is early intervention of members who go off-duty sick, or ODS as it's referred to. So within this program, there's a disability case manager, 2 disability management advisors, and their primary goal is really to continue contact with the member who's ODS, their supervisors and managers, and health services for the duration of that period, all with a mind to having that person come back to work. And there's a number of other support programs that are provided within the RCMP that are noted at the bottom there as well. And again, when more time is available, we'd be happy to discuss that further with you. Next slide, please. And now moving into oversight and accountability for RCMP under the Provincial Police Service Agreement. So per the Police Service Agreement, there is a national body, and it's called the Contract Management Committee. And it's made up of representatives from every province and territory that contract the RCMP, RCMP headquarters, RCMP corporate, Public Safety Canada, and there's a provincial territorial secretariat as well. So that group is really responsible for working together to consult and collaborate with each other regarding substantive decisions affecting the quality and cost of policing services under the PPSA. So there are multiple subcommittees as a part of this larger national committee, and Nova Scotia is represented on each of them. So we are part of those discussions on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. And the local contract management committee was established in Nova Scotia because municipalities are not a party to the contracts for RCMP as the provincial police. And so we established this committee as a way to share the information that's learned at the national level with municipalities that are affected. So the LCMC meets twice per year, and those occur after the national CMC meetings for logistics reasons. And this ensures that the province and municipalities work together towards common goals and providing an efficient and effective RCMP police service in support of the administration of justice. And next slide, please. Oh, perfect. In terms of the province, so Public Safety and Security Division is responsible for the management of the RCMP PPSA with assistance from Finance and Treasury Board. So we've previously discussed the role of Public Safety and Security Division kind of as a whole, and the RCMP liaison as well. And we wanted to kind of highlight how robust our reporting relationship is with the RCMP regarding service provision across the province. So we hold monthly operations meetings with the RCMP. There are financial reporting and analysis that is ongoing all the time, and same with policy reporting and analysis as well. We have daily communication with the RCMP as required for contract management. And then we're also provided situation reports from the RCMP for incidents that are emergency incidents that require some attention. So there is quite a robust reporting relationship, and information flows two ways there. Next slide, please. So I think that was a record for quick speaking, but I would be happy to answer questions of clarification if there is any.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of information that you were able to fit in there, so we definitely appreciate that. So I'll go to any members who might have some questions, clarification, or follow-up. Commissioner Blackburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for that presentation. That was incredibly helpful. I guess when it comes right down to it, the biggest question that I walk away with this is, okay, so can we confirm right here, right now, that the RCMP is indeed subject to the authority of the Board of Police Commissioners as a police advisory board under the Police Act?
Thank you very much for that question. I believe so, but I'm going to have to get back to you. Just in reviewing the bylaws that were put in place from your commission as well, that I think are important in the guidance of how that's actually operationalized.
All right, and just another quick question too. I think it was slide 9, talking about the Public Safety Security Division, and talking about regular meetings that you have with other jurisdictions. And I just wonder, do you ever have regular meetings with the Department of Health to discuss overlapping areas of concern, where there's just so much now that that are shared concerns? I just wonder if those regular meetings are taking place.
Thank you very much for that question, and what an important question it is. I'm happy to confirm that yes, we do have regular communication with our colleagues in the Department of Health, as well as the Office of Mental Health and Addictions as well. So there are communications with those offices regarding the connection between those services and policing.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Haley, for coming in and sharing this information. It's been really helpful. I do have a few questions. So specifically in one of your, I think it was your very early slides, there was a bullet that said police governance, and in relation to that was provide training. I don't remember the wording on it, but where it led me to was it kind of gave me the impression of Board of Police Commissions could potentially work with you to receive some training through you. So can you offer some more insight into that? Because I think that's an area where I'm not sure we knew of that. Maybe we have, I'm not sure. It could be something we're already receiving as far as notices, but I would like to see us take advantage of that. I also noticed that one of the slides spoke of a role of the RCMP liaison to your department, of course, which makes sense. One of the things that has been iterated here, sorry, those are my puppies, iterated here a number of times, is that we wish we had an ongoing opportunity or dialogue with someone. And it sounds to me, or looks to me, like maybe you are that person. So I'm wondering if you're open to creating a scenario. We have sort of a standing schedule where periodically we're going to check in, so that any kinds of things that might come up with us, that we could have an opportunity to talk directly to you without it necessarily going through one commissioner or the chair, where we all hear the questions and we all hear the answers. So that's the second piece. So I think there was a slide as well that spoke to the provincial responsibility, that you spoke of it, that it because of central services, it's an additional reducing of costs. Wondering if you could offer some insight into what those additionally have. Because as a counselor, I've been served by the RCMP and HRP. I've had opportunities to hear a lot of information, and so have the commissioners here, because the RCMP have been very proactive in helping us understand what what they can around that budgeting, but every once in a while they speak to that we'd have to ask the department. So I'm wondering if you can offer a little bit of information on that. Another piece of this is, and I'll go back to any of these if you don't get a chance to write them all down. You spoke to the adequate level of policing. The slide said spoke to the adequate level of policing for municipalities. And I just want to clarify, anytime I've seen a language like municipalities, I worry that all municipalities are being looked at through a lens of all being equal. Halifax municipality obviously I'm sorry, that's my doorbell. Obviously isn't a small municipality. It's the capital. It's the highest growth. It has to be looked at differently. And I just want to confirm that in the lenses that are being looked at for adequate level of municipalities, is that being taken into consideration? The last piece is, can we have a copy of your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions, and I'm going to endeavor to answer all of them, but if I don't, please just let me know. Firstly, I'll answer the last one first because it's the easiest. I did provide a copy of my presentation, so hopefully that can be circulated for your interest, and if not, I'm happy to share it directly as well.
Okay, thank you. It could be, I was having computer problems this morning. It could be that it's in there somewhere.
Okay. The first question was regarding training, and there was a slide. We do provide training to bodies of police governance, so that's both boards of police commissioners and police advisory boards. So you're more than welcome to contact our offices, and we can communicate and coordinate with you so that we can come in and provide that training to you. And that really leads to your second question, which is about ongoing dialogue. And the answer is a very enthusiastic yes. Public Safety Division is here to correspond with municipalities regarding the services that are contracted to serve your areas. So there are two ways that you can do that. Of course, contacting the division overall. So Public Safety Division will be more than happy to discuss, and you can do that through myself. And the RCMP liaison to the Department of Justice is another phenomenal resource, and we can provide her contact information as well. And that person's role is to communicate with municipalities so that those concerns or questions can be brought forward to us. So easy answer, enthusiastic yes. We'd love to kind of support an ongoing dialogue back and forth. Regarding your third question, which was information about the central services that reduce the cost to municipalities. We do recognize that some of the billing information that's provided is often a lot in a very short period of time. So that's one area that we'd be more than happy to have kind of ongoing conversations with you about, so we can ensure an understanding there. But yes, there are central services that the province pays for that are not billed to municipalities, and yet the municipalities are served by them. So there are a number of positions, including traffic enforcement is one example, informatics operations is another, and we can provide to you a list of those positions for your interest and for your information. I think that would be prudent. The next question is, do we consider all municipalities to be equal? Oh, I apologize. I'm looking at the chat and I'm not confident if I'm supposed to be acknowledging those and answering them in real time. No, I'm seeing, okay, thank you, Lindell. So whether or not we see municipalities all as equal, and the answer is most certainly not. The metrics that are used, or that we look at level of policing, there are so many things that are involved in that measurement, inclusive of some of the things I said, like geography, calls for service, the population, the nature of the population, i.e. is it tourist season very busy and then other times not? Like, there's so many different things that are actually involved in that measure. We were just trying to reiterate that simply the number of persons does not, necessarily give us a full picture of adequate level of policing for a municipality. Did I get all of them?
You did. Awesome. Good job. Thank you.
Commissioner McDougall, and then Commissioner Blackburn.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm delighted actually to meet you. I wasn't able to attend a Nova Scotia Association of Police Governance session in Truro that you presented to. I do represent Halifax on that board, and also I'm a member of the Canadian Association of Police Governance, so sort of familiar with all of those different organizations. And I understand that you're meeting regularly with the president of NSAPG, which is really tremendous, and that the training that Commissioner Ken has mentioned is actually a fairly new initiative under your jurisdiction and leadership. So really appreciate that. I do want to know, as well as Commissioner Blackburn, to have some clarity around the relationship to the contract with the RCMP. I understood we were a signatory to that, but I could be misinformed. I don't know where I read that, so it would be good to clarify that, get a better understanding. I do have a question about the number of years in the multi-year agreement. So when you are receiving that each year, I'm just curious to know how many years are talked about and looked forward to when you get that presentation. My next question, and I'm just going to finish with the next two because I might as well ask, and then you can, if you've made a note, can respond. When you pointed out some specialized services, I was wondering, do we actually pay for those specialized services if they're used, that the RCMP has to offer? How does that work? And my last comment is just a little bit maybe out of left wing, but so the Police Act says that the Board of Police Commissioners has 7 members, an advisory board has, I believe, 5. Since we are a combined commission and have advisory board, has there ever been any consideration that we would be able to have additional members to help us do some of the vast amount of work that we are hoping to take on over the next while, so that, for instance, today we've got 2 members not available. That leaves us with 5 people. If we were to be able to add some of the advisory members, that 5 number of people, that would bring us to 12, and we'd really be able to do some amazing work, divide into committees, that kind of thing. So just putting that out there as a thought for consideration in the future.
Thank you very much for your questions. And as with previously, I'm going to try and address them all, but please let me know if I've missed one. So regarding the contract itself, the Provincial Policing Service Agreement is a 2-party contract. So it is the Government of Canada and the Province of Nova Scotia who are party to that agreement, who are signatories on that agreement, and the RCMP is our service provider. So municipalities that receive the RCMP for service provision are a part of the legislation that provides us the authority to direct and bill municipalities, but they're not necessarily a part of the provincial service agreement. And I reiterate that only because of the importance of what that means for a reporting relationship and how imperative it is that we build these relationships so that you're provided with the information that would be useful for you to make decisions and to have that information. Regarding the multi-year financial plan, that comes, as a 5-year cycle. I should have said that in the slide. It's a 5-year cycle, so it's cyclical. We receive a new one annually. However, that annual report covers a period of 5 years, 5 fiscal years. In terms of specialized service, it is not a cost per use model. So these are positions, some of which are subsidized by the province. So they're part of those groups of central service that the province pays for. But they are a service that is provided as a part of the RCMP service agreement. They are just resources that are a part of that service provision. So it's not a cost per usage. It's an overarching model that can be used in emergency situations. And that Halifax example was a great one, just because you can see how many tentacles reach out from one incident, and having that access is quite important. And again, we can provide more information on the billing mechanisms, because I know that that is one area that often needs quite a bit more clarification, but respecting time today as well. And regarding the combined commission, so that is one thing that I will say I'll have to take away. I can't speak to previous conversations. I only know the time at which I've been here. And so I'm happy to kind of take that information away and do a little bit of work on my end, and then come back with a response to you on that.
I would just suggest that the conversation has probably never been had. It just occurred to me as we're listening to you and the thinking about the amount of work our commission wants to undertake. And it just made me think, if we were in a smaller community and we had an advisory board, there would be a number of people, but because we're combined, is it worth it to think about that? So I'll leave that with you, and you can take that away. And thank you so much for coming to present to us today.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Blackburn, you had a follow-up.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Haley, for committing to getting back to us with some more information. Just to clarify what it is that I was looking for, I'm just looking for a clear read on the Police Act, specifically the powers that are laid out in Section 66 in the Police Act. And so I think if you have a look at that, that'll probably clarify sort of what I'm looking for with regards to just the authority that we have as the Board of Police Commissioners with as a police advisory board to the RCMP. Thank you.
Thank you. So no one else, so I'm going to just jump in. And the beauty of going last, and very strategic on my end, is that sometimes questions that I have already get answered. So that means less speaking for me. So Haley, really appreciate you being here today. Two pieces of clarification that I just need. So going back to the agreement in the split where we pay or the 70-30 split. So you mentioned that if we were to reopen that agreement, we would have to sign on to the new agreement, which would be 90-10. So 90 provincial, 10 federal. Is that the breakdown?
Yes, Chair, that is correct.
Okay.
The population limit is actually 15,000 per the agreement. So you can see how grandfathering Halifax into that agreement has a significant impact on the cost share there.
Right. So if we were to, and you maybe don't have this information, maybe you can provide it to us if you're getting back to us. So theoretically, if we were to look at today's numbers and what we pay, if we did a 90-10, what would be the 90% share? And I'm asking for that now, just when you come back. What would that look like in today's standards if we had to do a 90-10? Because I think that'd be great information for us to understand as well, knowing this is potentially what we would have to, as a province, pay. Then as a city, obviously our portion have to pay to deal with that bill. And I do wonder, and you might not have an answer for this today either. So I know the previous government mentioned they were going to do a review of the contract and RCMP and et cetera. I'm not sure if that's still happening, and I want to ask you to do that, because I'm not gonna, it might be above your pay grade, so I'm not gonna put you on the spot. But what I will ask you though is, if there was a review to happen related to the RCMP contract and the services within Nova Scotia, would that mean right away that we would then be on that 90-10? Because as long as we don't try to sign a new agreement, that's when that, okay, so we can do a review, we can look at what we're doing now, but as long as we don't say we want a new agreement, we don't have to pay that 90/10. Okay.
Yeah, and if I may, Chair, just to clarify why I had that bullet on the slide is not to suggest that that would happen,
Right.
but more just to kind of highlight that usually if a municipality came now wanting to be a part of the PPSA and their population exceeded 15,000, the cost share arrangement would be very different than what was grandfathered into the 2012.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then the last one is the LCMC, the Local Contract Management Committee. When was that established? Do you know?
Now that is a phenomenal question that I did not expect to be asked today. I will get back to you on the date on which that Local Contract Management Committee was established. Just to give an idea of the representation on that committee, we do actually, I might have just 2018. Thank goodness for the RCMP.
I thought it was recent.
Right,
I thought it was recent. Yeah, thank you.
So to give an idea of representation, it's the Department of Justice, the RCMP liaison position, the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, the Association of Nova Scotia Municipal Administrators, Nova Scotia Municipal Affairs, which is of course a provincial department, and then a representative from a municipality with a municipal police service agreement, a representative from a PPSA municipality, and that is CAO Jacques Dubé, and a representative of police governance as well.
Got you. So that committee, among the many things that they deal with, that committee would also deal with the contract change when it comes to the oh my goodness, the words are leaving me, but the impact of the contract negotiations federally related to RCMP. That committee would deal with the impact of that and then obviously share it to their bodies. Okay, great. Okay, well, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for spending your time. I don't see anybody else who's asked to speak. So you'll provide us with some more information. We'll make sure we stay in touch and potentially in the future look at some way of making, if it's not a standing item every whatever it might be, we'll figure out a way to continue that discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so we are at 3:12 Commission. So it's been a long one. So I'm going to suggest we take a break just so people can stretch, get a drink of water, or any other liquid that is preferable to you. How long do you want to take? 5, 10? I'm going to look at the commission.
How long do we, I mean, we're scheduled till 3:30. I expect this next report to have a fairly lengthy presentation and with clarification questions and such. Are we anticipating that this is going to be extended? I'm not sure how we're approaching this, just thinking about the break.
Yeah, so
5 minutes for a break to me is plenty. I'm just thinking ahead while we're doing that. Maybe we can give some thought to how we want to approach this next half hour.
For sure. And Commissioner,
well, I sent a quick text to the chat. I have to leave at 4:30.
Yeah,
I have a meeting with the banks at 4:30.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, I have a hard stop at 4. So what time is it? 3:13.
Yeah, so we can do two things here. Before we do a break, let's kind of talk about this. So I know for sure that using my crystal ball right now, so bear with me. We're going to have pretty good discussion on the defund report. I think we've been waiting for it. It's lengthy, it's dense, but it's also informative, and there might be some questions from members. So we could do two things. We could continue as per usual in extended, and then once we hit 4:30, or well, I'll say 4:20 because Commissioner Kandudu will go. Then we don't have quorum. So at 4, I'll just say 4:30. We're not going to have quorum to make decisions. So that right there kind of determines how we move forward. So what we could do is continue, and then at 4:30 we stop, or we could get the subcommittee presentation and then save discussion for our next scheduled meeting.
I think that's the best approach. Sorry about that, Yemi. I think that's the best approach anyway. It's a big report. There's a lot to digest. There's probably a lot more questions. Just reading through, I had questions, and now hearing the presentation, I think that's in our best bet anyway to do that second approach.
Okay. So
Agree.
okay, got agreement from Commissioner Blackburn. Yemi, you're going to jump in. Anything?
I agree as well.
Okay. So let's do this. Let's take a 5-minute break, get fresh, and then we'll come back. We'll get the presentation from the subcommittee, and we will then save discussion for the next meeting. And by then we might have motions or whatnot from members. So we'll come back at 3:20, and we'll continue from there.
Good afternoon. It is now 3:21. We will be taking down the holding screen. Chair Smith, the meeting can be called back to order.
All right, thank you, Ian. So we are moving on. So again, thank you to Haley from Province for the information on RCMP and work related to provincial structure. So we're moving on to our reports. 10.2, members of Board Police Commissioners. 10.21, submission of the Board of Police Commissioners Subcommittee to define the police report, defunding the police, defining the way forward for HRM. So we have our presenter here, I believe, Dr. Jones, who's here with us to provide a presentation. And what we decided before the break was that we'll receive the presentation and then save discussion for our next scheduled meeting. So if there's any burning questions of clarification that folks might have before then, feel free to jump in. Not gonna stop folks from asking questions, but considering time, we have a hard cutoff at 4:30 because then we'll lose quorum. So just making sure that we have Mr. Joe up. I do see you. Hello. Before you go, I just want to really quickly, on behalf of the commission, say thank you to you and the group who I'm sure you'll acknowledge who put this together. I know from speaking to you and other members and also speaking to folks within the community, a lot of work went into this report, not only through research, but putting the information together, to holding the public engagement, to making sure folks feel like they had an opportunity to put their information or to be a part of it. And Commissioner Blackburn, thank you for the sticky note. You threw off my train of thought, but we love it. So yes, as her sticky note said, thank you. I truly enjoyed reading it. I read it twice, which says a lot. I don't read many things twice. So it just speaks to the breadth of work that you've done as a committee to get this to us today. So extend my appreciation on behalf of the commission, and I'm sure we'll have lots to discuss in the future. So with that, I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. I have a proposal. I had prepared, as you saw, a fairly lengthy presentation, and part of that was because I know that members from the public are watching and may not have a chance to engage with the report. I'm very willing to keep it short, try and keep it to 10 to 15 minutes and leave some time for discussion. We do have other public engagements planned around this report. So the reason why I had prepared quite a long presentation was for those who have not read the report to follow along. That PowerPoint is, of course, available on the board site, and people do have the report. So perhaps we could just go very quickly. I'll give a very short version. We'll leave some time for discussion, and I'm willing to return at the next meeting as well. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, it's fine. Oh, sorry, mute myself. Fine with me. Commission, are you fine with that process? I can't see. And sorry.
Yes, that's true. That's fine.
Okay, all right.
I think also at this time of day and after a long meeting, our capacities are probably low for taking in information. So I'll try and go very quickly. This will just be the highlights. I'll try and keep it short. So let's skip this slide.
In what I'll say, knowing how quickly your quickly is, if you could bring your quickly just down a little notch, because I know how fast you can go.
I'll try. I meant I will skip some of the slides. I'll try not to speak too fast.
I appreciate it.
I am speaking today on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I think this is a very appropriate day to be launching this report to the commission or presenting it. I just have a quote there that reminds us that Dr. King also was very concerned with issues of policing, incarceration, and punishment in society. I won't read the quote, but it's a good reminder for today that we continue that work of justice that has not ended. Next slide, please. This is just acknowledgements. This is a community process. While I am here presenting all of the work from the writing to the research to people who submitted memos, to people who engaged, who filled out surveys, who came to the public engagement, we could not have done this work without the work of community. Those names of people involved in the report are available on the second page of the report. And in particular, I do want to mention the subcommittee whose names are listed here for all their work, and the other authors, the authors on this report, including Tara Jadi, Harry Critchley, myself, Julia Rogers, and also Jen Taylor did much of coordination work as well. Next slide. So just a brief overview. This report is the result of community labor, and it's shaped by many hours of consultation, research, and engagement. And I believe you will see that reflected in the report. And these principles of community are the foundations of the report. Defunding as a concept and practice is grounded in this idea of returning power to communities to make decisions over how money is spent, to also feel empowered to keep their own communities safe, and to think up new solutions within communities for dealing with social harms. And finally, defunding, it's very important to frame this discussion, is not only about the removal of funds from police, which is often how people hear it as a negative, but it's also about investing in social structures and organizations and creating separate new models of safety based in communities and their concerns. So one of the things we wanted to do as we moved forward in framing this report is perhaps shift some of the conversation that sees this as often as people have fears around public safety, around crime, around how we protect ourselves, to also think a bit differently about how we consider policing, how we think about punishment, and how we can also think of other ways in our community to deal with some of those issues. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip the chapter summaries. This is available in our executive summary. So this is just an overview of what's in each chapter. From our opening, where we really go through the conversation on defunding and what the various elements are, what the arguments are, from where we also discuss different social issues, different approaches. I will skip that. That's okay. So skip slide, and you're going to skip slide and skip slide and skip slide. Okay, here we go. So that cut some time. Just briefly on the Halifax policing budget, which we were discussing today. Between the HRP and RCMP, the municipality collectively spent $127.4 million on policing in the fiscal year 2019-20, which works out to $265 per capita for both police forces. However, when we remove the RCMP, we get a more accurate figure, about $393 per capita for the HRP, which is more than cities of comparable size. So one of our recommendations is to bring our funding in line with other cities in their per capita funding. Next slide. A very brief snapshot. We have a more complex and detailed snapshot of policing within chapter 2 of the report. For example, we look at a week of data, a week chosen at random that gives us a picture of what the police are doing. And we do thank both the RCMP and the HRP for submitting data at our request. So we're thankful for getting that look. So this is just a very, very brief look. You can see police officers per 100,000 population from 2017 to 2019. And you can see that Halifax is, as we already heard earlier, is actually very highly staffed relative to population. Next slide. We can also see from the crime severity index that crime has been dropping for the last decade, which is of course relevant when we think particularly about fears that we need more officers so that we can arrest all of this crime that is happening. So this gives us a perhaps more accurate picture of what crime and violent crime looks like in Halifax, and we are in fact below the national average. We go into this in more detail in the report, so I won't spend too long on this. This is all in chapter 2. Next slide, please. And finally, with the money that has been requested for the budget increase, just by one metric, if we looked at affordable housing rooms, we can see how much we could afford for a number of units or rooms that could be built for the amount of the proposed budget increase. So that just gives an idea of some of the alternatives to social spending. Next slide, please. Just very briefly through the public engagement. I won't go through everything on this slide, but you can see we had a robust public engagement through many forums, through surveys, through people coming to the public engagement sessions, through working directly with community groups to get their input, memos provided by experts in the field. So we can see how much consultation was done, and we're very, very thankful to community. Some people, of course, agreed, some people did not agree, some people strongly disagreed, but we really thank everybody for engaging in this conversation, which is incredibly important for our communities, and getting all of those perspectives is really crucial in shaping our own understanding as well. Next slide, please. So some of our survey results. As you can see, a majority of participants in our survey indicated support for the idea of defunding the police. And you can see also there was a significant number of people who did not. Support was higher among women and gender diverse people, people with disabilities. So we do want to point out as well that there is not agreement on what defunding means. For example, some people that indicated that they did not support defunding, nonetheless did support ideas such as removing mental health from the police. So some people who hear defunding and hear get rid of police, or hear that it's very negative towards the police, at the same time often do share some of these principles, that there are other ways than relying on police to treat social issues. And particularly what we saw a large consensus on in our public engagement was the idea of mental health. And we'll move to that later. And I will also note that support for defunding was largely concentrated in the part of the municipality that is served by the Halifax Regional Police. Next slide, please. Our report is organized through 4 pillars of defunding. These pillars emerged from our engagement as we saw what people were speaking about on surveys. As you'll see in the report, we do a number of word clouds. We do a number of data coding techniques to show what people were engaged with, what were people's concerns, and all of that led into 4 pillars of defunding. So the first pillar deals with reforms to police practice, oversight, and accountability. So this includes things like concerns about the accessibility of the complaint system, concerns about the role of the police board, concerns about training, use of force, all of those. Oh, sorry, no, use of force will come on to detasking, but there's many of the issues around police accountability and transparency that we deal with in that pillar. Our second pillar, which is detasking, deals with reforms aimed at detasking the police and retasking more appropriate community service providers. Our third pillar deals with regulatory and legislative and policy reforms intended to promote community safety. And finally, in our fourth pillar, we look at social reforms and financial reforms as well. So we move from everything internal to policing outside to social issues and engagement as well as people's engagement with the police board and other oversight and democratic institutions. Next slide, please. I'll skip this slide. It's just a bit of background on the pillars, but you can find it in the report. Okay, just some highlights from the report. So reforms to police practice, oversight, and accountability. So one of the concerns within this chapter was to do with use of force incidents. So people's concerns about who is regulating how the police act. As our research shows, use of force incidents have been rising nationwide, both through things like taser incidents, shootings, and also other deadly force rates. So we can see some statistics on this slide. I'm trying to go quickly, so I'm hoping I'm not skipping too much, but this slide just gives a quick snapshot that in general, we've seen a disconcerting rise in use of force incidents and deadly use of force as well. Next slide, please. So in looking at that, we often see in reports that people recommend more training for the police as a result. For example, the Wortley report recommends training. However, as we considered those recommendations, we made the decision that it was more important to get transparency on the current training rather than recommend more and more resources into training. So we have concerns about what is available to us to know about training. For example, we know that training recommended in the Wortley report has not been implemented. So for that reason, we did not recommend further training, but we did instead recommend that the police board explore opportunities for disarming groups of officers, such as community response officers, minimizing the use of firearms by police. And also we made several recommendations that enhance police oversight and accountability, and which will require the board to fully exercise its governance and policy making role under the Police Act. Next slide, please. So this is just a few of our key recommendations from Chapter 5. So some of those recommendations deal with the board. So we recommend that you conduct research and consultation with community members, subject matter experts, and other stakeholders to examine opportunities for disarmament, and particularly such as community response officers, and also minimizing the use of firearms by the police. We also have recommendations to direct the HRP to immediately make their policies and procedures publicly available online, as is already the case in many municipalities. Toronto, Vancouver, these are all online and readily accessible, with, of course, the exception of policies that govern things that should be kept secure for officer safety, but many people put their use of force policies, their policies in dealing with youth, their gender policies, those are online, and we do recommend that that take place immediately. And in another of our recommendations, we suggest that the police board should reject any additional funding requests in relation to body-worn cameras. And we have a significant section in the report that looks at the research and studies that shows that body cameras do not have any effect on police behavior. They do not reduce violent incidents, and they do not promote accountability. So we do think that we could more productively address the roots of those misconducts and not spend more money on body cameras. This is all sourced in the report. We don't have a lot of time, so I do encourage people to read this in the chapter. Next slide. Chapter 6, which deals with detasking. That may not be a very familiar term to a lot of people. Detasking means removing an area from police responsibility and giving it to a more appropriate organization, or having the police share this area of responsibility with another organization. The delegation of current police tasks, in other words, towards more appropriate organizations and institutions, thus reducing the negative consequences of police engagement in unsuitable activities and therefore reducing the police budget. And one note is this does not necessarily mean that the police would be completely removed. And an example of this is third-party sexual assault reporting, which provides non-policing organizations the ability to take reports, to work with survivors, and then preserve the opportunity, if that survivor wishes, to move forward in reporting. So that's an example where we remove police from the initial reporting, but they may be involved later. So detasking can be on a spectrum. Next slide, please. As you can see, we make a number of recommendations around detasking, particularly related to mental health crisis response. And overwhelmingly, this was the area, even those that strongly disagreed with defunding, virtually everybody on this survey agreed that the way that mental health crisis is being dealt with through policing is not working. In our consultation with the National Police Federation, while they certainly do not support defunding, I would never want to give that suggestion, they themselves also did suggest that there are tasks that they are not equipped to take care of, and they did suggest that mental health may be one of those areas as well. So there is quite a big consensus around we need and having other civilianized options instead. Traffic enforcement and traffic safety, this was raised in earlier presentations as well. It came up in our survey responses great deal. And also, as I mentioned already, third-party sexual assault reporting, which removes only about 5% of people who are victims of sexual assault report those assaults. Many people, of course, feel failed by the court system. There's much trauma in engaging with the police. And so third-party sexual assault reporting provides the opportunity to still track sexual assault, to still have people report, to still allow people to be connected to services, but removing the police from that. As well, we also addressed incidents involving unhoused person, and we heard Colin speak about that policing today, and we're grateful for that presentation. Incidents involving young persons who often receive a disproportionate amount of policing, gender-based and intimate partner violence, where people, particularly people from vulnerable communities, are often extremely reluctant to report. Overdoses, which also deals with decriminalization of drugs, which we look at in our social reforms chapter. And finally, noise complaints. So that's just an idea of some of the areas that we address. I obviously won't be getting into the details today. Next slide. So as I said, mental health crises was an area of deep concern across our consultations. Mental health crisis response is a key area for detasking. 1 in 3 Canadians experience mental health issues or illness annually, and it is the leading cause of disability in Canada. Rates of mental health illness and issues are higher among racialized populations, people living in poverty, members of the LGBTQ2S+ community, and women. And the HRM, through the HRP, currently employs the mental health mobile crisis team to provide crisis support for people who are experiencing mental health crisis. Next slide, please. So police are meant to intervene in violent crime and not into non-violent mental health situations. And as Dr. Jamie Livingston raised in his presentation, the criminalizing of mental health is of deep concern. Not only because it, of course, makes people much more reluctant to call the police, but it contributes to the stigma around mental health and the poor outcomes that people experience as a result of that stigma in society. Many Canadians killed in police encounters suffer from mental health, substance abuse, or other related issues. And even in non-fatal interactions, the use of law enforcement to address health issues can create mental health service barriers, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and people of color and other equity-deserving communities. And as we speak about in our introduction, we do propose some lenses, and one of those lenses to rethink policing is a health lens, which can be applied not only for issues that we directly understand as health issues, such as mental health, but more broadly, we can think about how considering social issues as those of affecting health and well-being may be a more proactive and productive frame than always thinking in terms of punishment and repression. So we discussed that in our opening chapter. And finally, as I said, Dr. Jamie Livingston recommended that mental health crisis response systems only involve police when a level of danger or criminal activity warrants that involvement. And we do a scan through this chapter of the report, and we look at many different municipalities. Of course, people may already be familiar with the CAHOOTS program in Oregon, which has been getting quite a bit of interest and uptake from other municipalities, which is a model that removes the police completely from mental health intervention and instead uses mental health professionals, peer support, social workers, et cetera, to intervene, to connect people with services, which is able to provide a much more effective response rather than what we are currently doing, which often involves emergency rooms, arrest, and criminalization. Next slide, please. So the current model of mental health crisis in HRM is outdated, and it is no longer aligned with best practices, and is telling that the majority of respondents to our public consultation, including those who said they did not support defunding, agreed that mental health services should be diverted away from policing. So as a result, our recommendation number 16 is that council, in cooperation with the police board and the provincial government, should revise the mental health mobile crisis team model to ensure that mental health crisis calls are generally diverted to civilian-only teams. This model should also be explored for other social or health-based emergency calls. Next slide, please. So chapter 7 is dealing with social reforms. And what we mean here is that we have relied upon police for a long time as our first line of response. And in fact, as we learned from people who are involved in policing, police themselves will argue, and I'm not, again, suggesting that police support defunding, they don't, so I don't want to misrepresent what they say, but they do recognize that they should not be the first line of response for every incident. They should be the last line of response. And in order to get there, that is not just resting on the police. It is not just a notion of saying, well, the police need to change what they're doing. We also, more broadly, need to rethink how we are constructing society. For many decades, as we discussed in the report, we have disinvested and defunded social services and then turned to the police to fill in the gaps, which is also not fair to the police and not reasonable or rational or efficient or the best way of doing things. So in order to shift away from policing, we also need to shift the way we resource other organizations and the way, more importantly, that we think about why we rely on police when we can rely on other strategies. So that is what social reforms deals with in the chapter. As we say, defunding police is in many ways about reinvesting in fundamental and historically underfunded community resources. The two areas of social services needing reinvestment that members of the public most frequently mentioned were, as we said, mental health and substance use, and also affordable housing. And we heard that in Mr. Ellison's presentation as well today. So among the housing related recommendations, the subcommittee recommends that the council significantly increase its annual financial investment in affordable housing projects. And for those who say, what does that have to do with policing? Why are you talking about housing? Unhoused people have incredible rates of contact with the police. Studies show that unhoused people are severely over-policed in relation to incidents. We saw that in the previous presentation, where people speak about how police are often called in many, many cruisers to deal with small incidents, even after that incident has been diffused. So clearly that requires rethinking how we actually conceive of and deal with those who are unhoused in the municipality. Next slide, please. We're almost done. So very briefly, decriminalization of substance use. I won't read everything on this slide, but decriminalization represents a range of policy actions to reduce the harms associated with drug use. These harms, which result often from social stigma and from the criminalizing of drug use, include HIV, Hep C, criminalization and criminal records, drug toxicity deaths, and risky consumption patterns. So decriminalization generally involves removing criminal responses, such as incarceration, and maintaining non-criminal responses. People often suggest maintaining non-criminal responses. However, many advocates, and personally speaking, I am on this side, want to remove all fines, all punishments that are used for people who use drugs. So within that debate, we know that when people are criminalized, when people are fined, even if that is not a criminal charge, things like fines build up and mean that people still end up in arrears, they end up in the system. That matters. So if we look at decriminalization, rather than criminalizing drug use, a much more helpful lens is to use, again, a health lens. So next slide, please. Sorry, I'm trying to go fast, so I'm just very quickly trying to summarize in my mind. This slide basically deals with the topic that worldwide and across Canada, we have seen many movements to decriminalization. This is, at this point, not a radical idea. It's quite well accepted. We've seen the health minister commissioned a task force on decriminalization. We've seen decriminalization movements in Vancouver as well. And of course, many of these movements center people who use drugs and their experience, such as staffing safe use sites. We've had a presentation before on sobering centers at the board. Those are all examples of rethinking how we deal with substance use, removing a police response and instead instituting responses by peers, by communities, and by health workers as well. Next slide, please. So we have a recommendation that as part of its ongoing efforts to develop a municipal drug and alcohol strategy, the council should convene a working group to advise on developing a health and social equity-based approach to decriminalization. And I would emphasize that this should center and take expertise from people who use drugs, such as CAPHOOD. They have an incredible expertise. They know far more than I do on this topic, and I really recommend listening to them and their recommendations. Next slide, please. And then finally, affordable housing. We did hear about this in our previous presentation. Housing is recognized as a right, both nationally and internationally. The causes of the housing crisis, as we know, are complex. It's also complex dealing with the different levels of government, municipal versus provincial responsibilities. So we did make recommendations around housing to significantly increase the annual investment in affordable housing options and to reduce, again, the criminalization of being unhoused in this community. Next slide. So very quickly, when we speak about social reforms, we do want to shift the lens that defunding is not about making cuts to the police budget for austerity's sake, just saying, oh, well, we have to make cuts all around. More importantly, it is about reinvesting in vital, safety promoting, community building resources that have historically gone underfunded. And some of the areas that people suggested for refunding include arts, libraries, education, recreation, food programs, etc., all of which promote well-being, community cohesiveness, and also help to reduce social harm. Next slide, please. Financial reforms, I'll try and be very quick. You had a discussion about this earlier about involving community in the budgeting process. Participatory budgeting, for example, involves community in deciding where money goes. We also, of course, we already spoke about this, so I'm trying to be fast. So one recommendation we make is tying budgeting to performance metrics and also aligning our level of funding for the police with cities of comparable size. And I do have here a stat about our per capita funding of the HRP, which is $393 per capita, higher than many other Canadian municipalities, as well as higher than the national average. So when we look at cities of a comparable size, we are in fact overfunding the police. So we make a recommendation to aim to bring per capita spending on the HRP more closely in line with cities of a comparable size. Next slide, please. I was getting ahead of myself with participatory budgeting, but yes, finally, participatory budgeting. We recommend this process as we think about how would we reallocate money. That, of course, cannot be a top-down process. So we recommend that community be involved. As people are reading this report, we have seen feedback where people are saying, what about this or what about that? And that is very important. We want people to engage in this conversation and be able to raise issues that we didn't think of or that we thought of differently or that they disagree with. So we recommend that participatory budgeting should be undertaken, which connects people more closely to their communities. It helps people feel that they have a purpose and significance in this municipality, and it provides us a way to really fund what we value as a whole. Next slide, please. So finally, you can see we have recommendations that ensuring that funds diverted from the police budget should be redistributed through participatory budgeting. And we have some suggestions of levels that could include. And I believe that is the end of the slides. I tried to go, next slide. Is there a next slide? No. Okay. I tried to go very, very swiftly. So I'm sorry if there's gaps in that, but hopefully that was at least helpful in giving us a quick orientation.
Thank you. And that was great. So I'm not sure how you did it, but you did it. So great job. I think you hit on a lot of the main points, and in a future meeting, we can dig down a little deeper if needed. So I'm just wondering from any members, are there any burning questions that you wanna ask today, or would you like to save it for our next meeting? Commissioner Blackburn, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Not really a question, just wanted to just personally thank Dr. Jones and her team. An amazing job. This report is everything that I wanted it to be and then some, and very, very much appreciate the work. And just a heads up that at the next meeting, I'll be bringing forward a motion in hopes of striking a subcommittee of the Board of Police Commissioners, so that we will sit down with the recommendations and examine them each, and parse through to see, okay, which of these things can the Board of Police Commissioners do, which of these things require the province to do, which of these things require the council to do, and then just sort of come up with a work plan coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to thank the Board of Police Commissioners. I believe that this process, convening this communal process, I think it was unique. It was far more work than we imagined when we began. We never expected to get so much engagement. And I think that level of engagement, whether agreeing or not, shows that people are interested and engaged in this idea. And I really do hope that the board and then council and other levels of government continue to engage community in these processes. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to work on this. And as I said, it was collective work. This is not my report. This is a report done with a team of people and then a broader community, and it could not have happened without them.
No, agreed. This is just the beginning of the conversation.
Exactly.
Thank you, Commissioner McDougall.
Excuse me. I just want to echo what Commissioner Blackburn has said. I think when we first asked that you lead this research, Dr. Jones, I had an idea or a thought, or where's it going to go, and it's been way more engaging in the community, and I think it's really exciting to hear of the number of people who've been involved in this. And I do respect the fact that you are giving credit to others on the committee, but you've led this, and I think there's a huge amount of thanks that we have to give to you for taking this on, certainly not having a whole lot of understanding of where it was going to take you, but I hope you understand how we appreciate this, and I will be there at the next meeting to sit with Commissioner Blackburn and second her motion, because I think it's really critical for us to dig into and assume responsibility that we can assume, and look for others to figure out how we're going to accept all of these recommendations or what we need to do. But just at this point, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I will say as well that Obviously, there were many people that also felt strongly in the opposite direction. Many people, of course, disagree with our solutions, and we're really grateful for them for also engaging. One thing that I think was really valuable through this process was being able to engage, at least to see what people are thinking, even if we're very diametrically opposed. So we're really thankful for people for taking the time. We certainly did not expect everyone to agree, and everybody did not. But I think that is very, very valuable. So we really, we certainly never wanted this report to be something where we're imposing it on community or it's my way or the highway. So we continue to hope that people will critique, people will analyze, people will engage. And from that, we're hoping that we can start to forge some new understandings. So thank you very much.
You, Commissioner Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Doctor, I really as well want to just make sure that you know how much we appreciate the work that you and your team have done, and the other commissioners have articulated that very well. I wasn't part of the Board of Police Commission when you were engaged first, but it's a pleasure to work with you. And the report is very thorough and very comprehensive. I do have further questions, but I'm going to save that for a time when we're not so rushed. I do apologize for putting you in the position where that often happens on these long meeting days, but I want to encourage the chair and our commission to look at whenever we do schedule this, that we schedule, I mean, almost completely, I think, for this. This is so important to the work that we do. There's so many recommendations that I think I would like the opportunity to really go through them at a pace that does them justice, not only for the work that you did, but of course for the work that's yet to come. So I would encourage us to look at scheduling something where it's dedicated to this. I really appreciate Commissioner Blackburn's position and notice of motion, although not informally, that motion will come forward. Because my last question was going to be for you is it from your opinion, what would be the next step for those that were involved in making these recommendations in this committee? But I think Councillor Blackburn has put a nail on it and gives us a good way forward, and we'll debate that a little further next time. I have one question for you that has continued to kind of creep out that I would like to ask today. I'll save the rest for another day, but it's a fairly fundamental one, but it's an overarching one that I need to get my head around, which is that this report was set out to define defunding. And I know you've landed in a place where it's broader than a simple answer, right? So I get that. But I guess where my question is, so much of the engagement and the dialogue and certainly the questions and I think set out in this report involved language of using defunding as a word that yet was not defined, so left it very broad for individuals to come from their perspective. So how did you and your committee rationalize that language to be used in the absence of a defined a definition, and how still have it relevant at the end of the day in a way that allowed you to land in a place that says, okay, this is where we are? Because I'm just from a contextual space to say this was your mandate, and this is where this was a key piece that we obviously at the Board of Police Commission, and it wasn't me, but others, and I get that, we needed to define it a little bit better. Can you just give me a little insight into that?
So when the report was commissioned, it was in relation to a motion that was submitted that said that defunding would involve using the police for police-related tasks and not using the police for non-police related tasks, which of course is very broad because anything the police do by default becomes a police-related task. So in summary, Chapter 1 does deal with a definition, and it's a quite simple definition because defunding on its surface simply means removing funds from the police and placing them into community organizations or other alternate forms that can deal with those issues. So that is a very simple definition. The question is, of course, what does that look like? How does that take place? How do you equip other organizations? It would be irresponsible, for example, and we did not do this in the report as a result, for us to have recommended a budget number when we have no way to say what the capacities are in a community who is available to deal with mental health. What resources do they need when we remove those tasks from the police? So it's not a simple thing of saying, oh, just take mental health away from the police and give it here without sufficient investment. So the report really then deals with the aftermath of the definition. So chapter 1, I do believe, does give some definitions. And I would say, yes, that defunding in its simplest form simply means removing funds from the police and returning them into community to deal with issues that are not under the purview of the police. But what that means is, as we found out, quite debatable among different people. For example, the National Police Federation does support refunding community organizations while they don't support defunding. However, interestingly, as I address in that chapter, as we address, there are points of commonality and points of concern. So even though we don't have a consensus, certainly with the police on defunding, they would never say defund the police. They do say, however, that we are tasked with things that are not appropriate for us, that we're not trained for, and we ourselves believe that could be more efficiently dealt with in other ways. And that is actually an example of a defunding principle when you remove it from the idea of defunding. So that was one of the things that, as this phrase has become perhaps more of a slogan, it in some sense has been stripped of nuance and what it means. And then people often respond to it by saying, okay, so you just want to, we don't know what that means, and it sounds negative and it sounds bad and it sounds dangerous. So the reason for expanding upon that through the report was to try and really hit those nuances and try to make that a broader conversation rather than simply saying, okay, it means taking money from the police. Well, yes, but how, why, to what purpose, what is the impact of that? Who's going to pick up the slack? All of those questions are things we also attempt to provide some recommendations around. Good,
thank you. I really appreciate that insight into that. It's great because I certainly have heard that, and naturally I'm sure you had. So that wraps it into a piece that I think is able to be articulated to the public.
And the way we organize, so chapter 1 really deals with that conversation around defunding, defining conversation, defining defunding, what the objections are, what are the roots of this conversation, then we move from there. So for people who are interested in that original mandate, I recommend chapter 1 to read. So thank you. And I do want to thank you for your beach behind you on this snowy, windy day as I sit here. It's really nice to see this beautiful summer day that we may get back to one day.
That's McNabb's Island. Feel free to visit.
Thank you both. So I have one question that, I have one question and then a comment. So I'll just ask my question first. So already the thanks have been extended. So in your view, Doctor, how do you envision, and you can either speak on behalf of the committee or you can speak on behalf of yourself, but how do you envision us as the commission adopting the recommendations?
Well, I think what Councillor Blackburn proposed is a good path forward. I think they take careful consideration. Certainly, I would not suggest that people adopt recommendations without thinking closely about them. Some of them you may decide you don't want to adopt. Some of them you may adopt. But I think they obviously require discussion. They require consultation. In many of the recommendations are recommending things like consulting with community groups or consulting with other levels of government. That is a process. I do think there are some that can be implemented very quickly and easily. I think, for example, making policies available online should not be too difficult to implement. Not funding body cameras is simply a matter of not doing it if people agree with that recommendation. So there are some that I think are quite immediate, and there are obviously others that take more long-term work. I will say that I very much hope and recommend that the board does particularly focus on the recommendations around mental health. As I said, people recognize this as a crisis. There are many, many models of police-free mental health that already exist. And I think we as a municipality could move forward on that and really look at these recommendations and whatever else may be attached to them, work with people like Dr. Jamie Livingston and other experts. And I think I would really say that if one thing came from this report, something that everybody seems in consensus over is we need a new model. And I would really hope that recommendation or those recommendations around that are adopted and brought into line with best practices.
Great, thank you. No, that's perfectly a great thing for us to mull on. So with that, I thank you for your presentation and being here today. We'll figure out how we're going to approach the next meeting. And if you or other members are interested in joining and being available for questions, that'd be great.
Yes, I'm available, and certainly other members of the subcommittee. I will put that out to them as well. Thank you very much. I know it was a long report to read, a substantial report. We look forward to your further engagement with the community. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And I don't think we want to stay any longer, so I'll stop talking. Thank you, everyone.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, Lisa. So members, just to kind of close up that a little bit. So we're going to, in the future, and it was suggested that we have a meeting specifically focused on this. So that could potentially happen. We have a lot of competing priorities at the moment. So we'll definitely see what we can do to make sure that happens. But I definitely, it doesn't go unnoticed that we do need to have ample time to discuss that report, because there's a lot of specifics in it that we could have discussions on one of those recommendations for an entire meeting. So really figuring out a way to make sure that we not only are prepared to discuss it, but we're doing it in a thoughtful way. So again, appreciate all the work that's been done on that. I'll make sure I follow up with the commission to figure out how we're going to move forward with having those discussions. And as Commissioner Blackburn mentioned, she'll bring a motion forward. How we adopt recommendations, if we adopt any of the recommendations, is the most important aspect of this. It's one thing to say, yeah, we support it, but it's another thing to actually do the work. So that is where my mindset will go as the chair, is how do we accomplish adopting any recommendations within the report, but also making sure that we involve community in it as we go, because that is our role as the commission. Sorry, Commissioner Kent.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. Do we have to formally accept this, make a motion to accept it, like to receive it? Do we have to do anything like that? No, I'm seeing Marty say no. One of the questions I do have, though, is that because this is a Board of Police Commission committee that we set this in place, is this now considered property of the board? Is there anything for the future? Like, I think that Dr. Jones had mentioned, I meant to ask this while she was there, mentioned that there was still some public engagement or something, or some stuff that was going to be going out. And is that appropriate, or do we now manage the use of that report in a way that allows us to, to utilize it publicly in a way that is most, what we feel is most effective? So I'm just unsure. I want to make sure that committee has an understanding, and we do, of what now happens with this report. And obviously, within a community context, people have lots of ability to talk about it, but
So that's actually a great question, and maybe what we can do for next meeting is just have that information prepared in terms of who owns the data. So HRM and the commission, it's because we commissioned the work. It's ours, but for me, and I'm speaking as my not with the chair hat, because I have to obviously get the thoughts from the commissioners. I think that we want to make sure that if folks want to use this information, that we make it available, understanding that it was work that was done by a subcommittee and whatever is needed to be done to acknowledge that work. But it is ours as our report, because we commissioned it. But we do have to recognize that it was done with the community, and we do have in the future, and this will something to kind of think about as we move forward, is what do we do now in terms of the subcommittee? Because the subcommittee did do what we've asked them to do in terms of creating the report and outlining the definition and how that looked with our context. And I don't know how we move forward, or does this subcommittee, depending on Commissioner Blackburn's motion, continue as the subcommittee just in another form? Do we give them a new terms of reference? I'm not sure, and that's something that we can think about as before the meeting, and then come prepared with some of those questions and ways forward. So overall, data is ours, but the hope is that we make it available to those who need it. Because to me, and I didn't say this while Dr. Jones was here, I think this is going to be a report that many municipalities are going to want to read, reference, and probably resource in some way, because there's not many thorough reports like this that you can find, and if any, other than I think Edmonton might have, and Toronto has a pretty good report as well. But this is one of few reports that are this in-depth when it comes to police resource and related to defunding. So I'm sure that we need to get our ducks in a row, because there's going to be folks who are going to want to reference this report and use that data that we've collected. So good point, and we'll make sure we have something prepared just so it's clear at our next meeting. Yeah, I had my power flicker as well, so there could be a chance that one of us might lose power. Commissioner McDougall, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to say that I think in the next short time, there's going to be a lot of interest from the public to know about the report itself, and Dr. Jones and the community, or the committee that worked on this, that kind of thing. And I think as for our response to that, we're not ready yet, and we'll get there. But as we said, we would talk about this at our next meeting. But I think in the interim, it's good for there to be some public engagement as to how the defunding committee put this together, what sort of work they did to canvass community, that kind of thing. And it just broadens the awareness of it.
For sure. Marty.
I just wanted to say that you don't have to do anything at this point in terms of presentation, but if you wanted to, you could also you could have a motion to accept the report and thank this subcommittee at this point. So I'll leave that with you.
If members are interested, we could accept the report through motion.
I'll move that, Mr. Chair. I think that's an important piece to have in our minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Yep. So the motion would be that the Board of Police Commissioners accept the report from the subcommittee to define defunding the police.
Question?
Okay, great. Question's been called.
Also add thanking them.
Yeah.
That
was part of what Marty recommended, so that's what I was moving.
Okay.
Acceptance of the report of the subcommittee.
We have it listed that the Board of Police Commissioners accept the report from the Defunding the Police Subcommittee and thank the subcommittee for their service.
Okay, great. That works. That's why we pay you the big bucks.
Think we need to vote?
Yep. So the motion's on the floor, adding the thank you. So thanks, Ian, for doing that. And all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. All right. So that will go to a future meeting for us to have more in-depth discussion and potentially have some motions come forward. So we are at 4:14. We got another 15 or so minutes before we have a hard cutoff. I had a power flicker. I'm not sure if anybody, but I think Commissioner Kent, you mentioned your power was coming and going. So really quickly, we have Commissioner McDougall, Canadian Associated Police Governance webinar series, which should be a quick motion. So I don't want us to defer that one. We do have the chief update. And I feel bad we haven't had any peep from the RCMP today. Maybe I'm not sure who's here in the meeting representing. If we can just get a hello, because I didn't even check my cameras to see who's here joining us. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, it's Darren Campbell and Dustine Rodier. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, great. Cool. I didn't check our cameras at the beginning, and I feel like we've had you waiting in no questions. So we just want to make sure you were there and you were not asleep on your desk, but I didn't assume so.
We're wide awake.
All right, appreciate that. So and then that is it. So if members are interested, so we can do the webinar and the chief updates. There's no motion attached to the chief update. So I'm wondering, Marty or Ian, if we do we need after the webinar, are there any items that need quorum or decisions?
So to have a meeting at all, you have to have quorum. You can't deal
Okay.
with those items without quorum in it. So once we lose quorum, the meeting is deemed to be recessed until quorum can be established or the next meeting date.
Okay. So
I'm gonna have to leave as well as Yemi. I've stayed a little late, but I'm pushing my
Right.
luck now.
yeah, so I would the chiefs feel any kind of way if we defer their updates until next meeting? Does that affect them at all?
I'm okay to defer, Chair.
Okay.
And it's fine from the RCMP as well. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Sorry to keep you waiting on that. So we'll just move on to the 10.2.2, which Commissioner McDougall, Canadian Association of Police Governance 2022 webinar series.
So very quickly, every year CAPG National Organization offers webinars. During this last year and the year before, they've become virtual, obviously. And so there are 12 webinars offered. We as a member can pay $1,000 to have access to all 12 webinars. And not only do we all get access to everybody on our commission, but another 3 people. So it's open to 10 people altogether once we sign up for all 12 of them at $1,000 for the year. So in order to do that, we need to have approval from the board to make that expenditure. And I noticed too that Harry wrote when this was circulated, I believe, because the first webinar is on governance, and he was very interested in that. So I'm hoping we can just pass this motion to buy into the webinars, and then they'll be available. You'll all get codes and passwords and that sort of thing, notices when they're going to happen. So it's really education for the year.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I'll just agree that the ones that I've attended have been great, very informative, and I'd like to figure out for this year coming a way that we could try to get more commissioners and other folks who are interested in involved in these webinars, because they're very good. It's just, you know, time is always one of those factors that are difficult. So if I don't see anyone asking to speak, so I'll call for the question on this item.
Question?
I think we need a seconder first.
Sorry, second. I thought, yeah, Commissioner Kent seconded. Thank you. Seconded by Commissioner Kent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Thank you. So that has been approved. Moving on to Commissioner updates. We have none. We will save the chief updates until next meeting. Maybe if chiefs, if there's anything that you think is really worthwhile sharing, you can just email it to me, and I'll just send it to the commission. So anything you think that might be worthwhile sharing, just feel free to email it, and I'll make sure folks get it. Yep, I see some hands. Commissioner McDougall. Oh yes, okay, that's enough. Yeah, I see. Yeah, RCMP.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to put on the record that I did very much enjoy the report from Dr. Jones, and I do have a number of comments and questions related to that. So I look forward to an opportunity to be able to offer our views and our input into that very important discussion. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. So going to added items, we have none. Items for future consideration, we have none. In camera, we only have the minutes. So I'm wondering if we can approve the in-camera minutes. Move it in a seconder.
I'll move it.
Moved by Commissioner Kent, seconded by Commissioner Akindojo. For the in-camera minutes, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. We have the minutes. There's no need to go in camera unless members want to, but I'm assuming there's nothing. So notice the motion from members, and Commissioner Blackburn, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I think I've pasted something in the chat, so I may require Ian to help me along here, but I will move a notice of motion that at a future meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners, I plan to move a motion or introduce a motion to strike a subcommittee made up of 3 members of the Board of Police Commissioners to review the recommendations of the defined defunding police report and determine the body responsible for their completion.
Seconded by?
That's just a notice
no,
of motion, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a long
I was going to
one.
say, oh my God, I'm not ready.
Yeah. It's been a long one. So thank you for that. And that will come at our next meeting. All right. So there's no other notice of motion?
Yeah. I have one.
Okay, yep. Commissioner McDougal.
I'd like to bring a motion in February to, and I don't have the official wording of it yet, but the Halifax Board of Police Commissioners send a proposal to host the Canadian Association of Police Governance in-person meeting in 2024 in Halifax.
Great. Yep. Just send the wording to Ian or Andrea when you have the chance, and we'll make sure it's there for next meeting. All right. So that was most motions. Date of next meeting, scheduled meeting is February 28th, but we will have a meeting, maybe 2, who knows, before that, to deal with some other items. And I ask for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, commissioners. I know we're